and you may begin when ready.
Hey, good morning, everybody. Thank you for being here this morning. This is a meeting of the NIAA Rules, Regulations, and Policies Committee. Okay, we're going to call this meeting to order at 9:03. I'm going to start with roll call. Just say present or here when I go to your name. Reggie Farmer.
Here.
Cy Frederick. I don't think he's here yet. Okay. Jonathan Grandy.
Here.
Tammy Habig.
Here.
Jerome Reamer.
Here.
Jim Pace.
Here.
Ryan Sims.
Here.
Pamela Sloan. Rollins Stallworth. Kate Scroy, myself, Timothy Jackson.
Here.
Paul Anderson.
Here.
Okay. All right, we're going to move on to item 3, public comment. This time provides an opportunity for citizens to address the committee about any matter not on the agenda. Items raised during this portion of the agenda cannot be deliberated or acted upon. Should a member of the public wish to speak on a matter not listed on the agenda, it is asked that said person please complete a green public comment card and submit it to the committee chair prior to the opening of this item. Members of the public who have submitted public comment by email will have their email read into the record. A limit of 3 minutes per person and/or 5 minutes for the spokesperson of a particular group may be imposed. It is requested that comments be directed to the committee as a whole. Comments that are determined to be irrelevant, repetitious, offensive, inflammatory, willfully disruptive, or deemed to be personal attacks will not be permitted. I do have 2 public comments, one of which was specifically for item 10, which is the end of the meeting public comment. So I'll hold it off until then. It's related to a topic that we're not talking about today. And the other one is specific to item 7, and they asked it to be read during 7. So we'll hold off and read that at that time. So at this time, there's no public comment for this particular time. So we'll move on to item 4, approval of our meeting agenda. So looking for a motion and a second to approve our agenda for today.
Member Frederick, I move file a motion to approve the agenda.
Thank you. Looking for a second.
Second. Habig.
Thank you. And Cy, I've marked you present. Thank you. All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? All right, that passes. Thank you. And we're going to go, I didn't ask for it to be flexible. We're going to go right in order today. So it doesn't need to be flexible today. We pretty much have just several regulations that we're going to be looking at today. So we'll go right in order. Moving on to number 5, looking at our meeting minutes from our last meeting, December 6th. Hopefully you had a chance to look at them. I apologize. I didn't put page numbers on this, but this starts on page 5 of the packet. If you hopefully had a second to read through those, make sure there's no errors. If there's anything, please let me know. Goes down to page 8 of the packet. Anybody have anything for the minutes? If not, I'm looking for a motion to accept, approve.
Jonathan Grandy, committee member, motion to approve the minutes from the December meeting.
Thank you. Looking for a second.
Reggie Farmer, I second.
Thank you. All in favor, say aye.
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 Aye. Aye.
Any opposed? All right, that passes. Okay, moving on to item 6, our possible Nevada Administrative Code changes. The first one we're going to talk about is the physical exam regulation. If you scroll down to page 9 of your packet, it's regulation NAC 385B.336. This regulation, we've actually implemented this change already based on the SMAC committee, our sports medicine advisory committee determined that we would be doing physicals yearly at this point, and we adjusted our form. We've already implemented that new form and all of that. What didn't happen when this all occurred was a change to the regulation. So this is kind of backtracking, making sure that we just get our regulations to line up with our policies and procedures and what we're currently implementing. So if you take a look, the only real changes that needed to be made here was just including that this would be a yearly physical exam in subsection 1, just so that it's very clear that this is happening every year, that you're actually doing the physical. And then in subsection 2, we used to have language there that I've crossed out that has to do with the interim form that we had. Some of our districts still went by this. Other districts actually went to yearly, but some districts still use this, where unless a student marked yes to any of those interim document questions, they only did their physical every 2 years. So we've removed that language, so now that every school and every district is required to do a yearly physical. And so subsection 2 just simply reads, as you see, each pupil who wishes to participate in a sport, you have your yearly physical per subsection 1, and then you also have to complete the form approved by the association. And so not a huge change here, just removing some of that language for being allowed to do it every other year if they don't have a positive answer to one of those questions. Outside of that, I did not change anything else to this regulation. So looking for any conversation about that, if that makes sense, follows what we're doing, any commentary to share there.
I do, is it in here, or is it somewhere else about the one page only being allowed to be uploaded?
Yeah, so that's more of a procedural thing, and that's actually possibly changing as well. We've been talking with some members of the SMAC committee, and Tim can jump in at any point as well. We do feel like with only uploading that one document, we've missed some things. We've missed some information that's really vital for some kids' health, and we're kind of in the process of possibly getting the whole packet back on there. So we don't want to put anything in our regulation about that. That's more procedural about whatever document and form that we are currently using, since that sometimes changes. So that information's on the document right now, but again, that could change. Anything else? All right. So at this point, just looking for a motion so that we can send this to workshop before our next Board of Control meeting, or at the next Board of Control meeting, so that we can get this implemented into law.
Member Frederick, I move to motion to approve the NAC 385B 336 on physical examinations.
Thank you. Looking for a second.
Member Jonathan
I'll move
Grandy, second.
Thank you. Any other questions, comments on this? Okay, all in favor, say aye.
I
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, that passes. Moving on to 6B, these are a series of regulations. We talked about this at the last Board of Control meeting, that have information about when we can fine, or when there's a fee that is due to the association. So what we're looking at is an updating of our fine structure, as Tim discussed at the Board of Control meeting. And at our last rules and regulations meeting, he actually brought this up as a future item as well. Possibly talking about, repeat offenders, and if we want to add anything relating to that. So if you look at pages 10, pretty much through almost the entire packet, there's just a few pages after for 212 and 910. These 8, 7, 8 regulations are all related to that. This one, before we get into kind of the other ones, this one does have a bit of language change as well. The rest of them are really just looking at that amount for the fine. So I want to talk about this one a little bit more, and then I'll let Tim kind of jump in with some money and fine structure changes possibly that we're looking at. So 302, this regulation is about establishing schedules and submitting that information, and possible additional penalties. So one of the biggest things we have trouble with is just getting those schedules, getting them in a timely manner. And then the bigger thing and issue that we've had some sanctioning happening this year is tournament participation, where we don't know you're participating in a tournament. It's a tournament with unsanctioned teams, or it's a tournament playing on a Sunday, or it's a tournament that, we just don't really know what's going on. And if we don't know you're in that tournament, it's hard for us to help navigate that if you're eligible to really participate in that particular tournament. There's sanctioning that has to happen through the NFHS for the other team, so other teams or the host. So those things we're all able to look up on our end if we know that they're in the tournament. So what we've added here, Bart put together this language for 2 and 3, just adding some specific information about how you are going to submit your tournament, when you need to give us the information, and we need to know all the specifics: date, time, site, opponents, so that we can really vet that and make sure you're eligible to participate in that and there's no issues with that. So that's really the change in the language here. And then I have in red, I have $100 there because, as I was saying, we are looking at some possible changes to all those fees and fines as they're a bit outdated. So, Tim, did you want to add anything about amount here? Anything you're thinking as we start talking about the money part of this?
Good morning, everyone. Thank you guys for being here. Appreciate it on a cold Monday up here for sure. As I was talking about this at the board meeting and we were talking about it privately amongst ourselves as a group, what we've discovered is that our fine structure is out of date. The examples I've given have been relatively poignant on this. That, you say $100 and $100 doesn't really impact anybody. When I was at the superintendent's meeting last week, I mentioned this fine structure discussion that we were going to have, and they asked the question what a fine was, and I explained, hey, you don't turn in your rosters are inaccurate, it's $100. And they were sitting there and their heads were down or in various stages of looking at other things. And I said, what I'd like to do is say that the impact needs to be greater. I said, because if I said you had to give us $1,000 and all of them stopped and looked up, I don't want this to be punitive in the nature that we put somebody into hock for this. But I believe what we need to look at is a penalty plan that is on a continuum, increasing as it goes forward. Currently, Bart, can I share my screen? Yeah, good. Okay. Oops. No, I can't.
You may, Kate will just need to stop sharing hers.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Thanks, Kate.
Yep.
Right there, share. Okay. I'm assuming you guys can see that.
Yes.
Maybe a
Probably
little
very-
bit bigger.
I was gonna say bigger, please.
Yeah, no problem. That better? Need bigger?
Much better.
Okay. Currently we have the following definitions within our, we don't have the following definitions. We have the following words and terms in our handbook. We have fine, sanction, probation, and suspension. And I think those are the first things we need to define. Currently we have a simple fine of $100 with a max of $1,000. We have a sanction that carries $1,000, probation that carries $2,500, and suspension that carries a $5,000 fine. And I just quickly drafted out some language, like a fine is a monetary penalty imposed on the individual or entity for a regulation violation. Penalty is breaking the regulation. Sanction is a period or probation is a period of time for the individual or school to ensure adherence. And suspension is a time when the individual or member of school or district is not permitted to participate. So I think as we define those, we would become more consistent across the board. But what I'm really considering here and would like this group to look at is it being a continuum. In other words, right now, these are where they would fall. Basically, the first offense is $100, the sanctions $1,000, probation, suspension. I believe we need to put it on a continuum because what we're seeing are schools are violating the same rules over and over again in different sports. I mean, you don't do your roster in cross country, it's $100. Then you turn around in basketball, you don't do your roster, it's $100. Well, to me, that's the same penalty for the same offense. You've done it twice now. And I think we should, look at that as a possible starting point. Likewise, I think the first offense needs to be up to $250. And then $500, $1,000, $1,500, $2,500, and $5,000. Because my thought is, if you get past a second offense, you've got some institutional control issues here. If you're doing the same thing twice. And I believe that we should have a reset on this as well. That, we put the period in there for probation that we set a term. If you do the same thing in the next year, 2 years, 3 years, I don't care, whatever this group wants to go with, we can discuss. But I think we need to look at it from that position because Kate can attest. We had a school that had violated a regulation for, was it 2 years, Kate? And it was supposed to be $100 per game. Well, they send in their fee. They sent in, it was, instead of going overboard, we considered it 2 separate events for 2 separate years and capped it at $1,000. And when they send it in, they send in $200 because they are so used to just writing the $200 check. And then when we talked to them and notified them, they were like, well, if we'd have known that, we would have appealed. Well, what's the difference between a $200 sanction or a fine and $2,000 fine When you did the exact same thing, this one carried more weight because of the amount of money. Now you start to realize, oh, I should have been paying better attention. So I'd like this group to take a look at this and see where they fall on this and how they feel. But I just put this up here as a starting point for everyone. But I do believe we need to have a continuum so we can keep a new fine structure that keeps people on pace and they know where they're at. Any questions for me?
Good on this, Tim, and I'll let everybody have a question. I just want to make sure, so I know too, Tim, when we're looking at that, that's really specific to, I think it's 960. I'm just gonna scroll down. Okay, so what Tim was just kind of referencing, which we'll get to this regulation in a little bit, is those numbers are specific in 960, but that also will then trickle into these other regulations we're going to talk about. So just so that you understand, as we're looking at that, be thinking about what makes sense for each of these regulations, because that kind of governs the rest of those fines.
Hey, I have a question, Kate, Tim. Can you guys hear me? Yeah.
Yep.
In regards to go back to your fee structure, Tim. And I am in agreement that we need to increase, absolutely. But when you talk first offense, second offense, I just want to be on the same page before we go forward. So let's say in the winter season, right now, we have some schools that for this one program, they didn't roster a kid. They were sanctioned for another sport, they didn't roster a kid, and the fee structures are the same. Would that constitute a second offense? And even if it's something completely different than this time, its kid wasn't on a roster, the second time, maybe it was an eject, I don't know, whatever the situation is, how would the fee structure look for those situations?
To me, it's fruit of the same tree. So it's the same type of offense. It would just continue down the continuum. If you don't roster the kids in cross country, then we come in basketball, you don't do the rostering again, the same offense. You've done it twice. Now you're on step two. You do it a third time, a fourth time. So I think we need to look at it that way, because until we start looking at it that way, people are going to continue to do what they've always done until it becomes more painful to not do it.
Yeah, and I'm in agreement with that as well. Okay, thank you.
But you're not saying like I agree 100% if it's like the first, second, third for the roster, but you say you don't fill out the form for tournament participation. That's not going to be the same thing. It's going to be its own offense, correct?
Correct. That would be a new line.
Okay, cool.
So each violation would be its own continuum. Now, if we see a pattern where a school's doing all these things together, then we lump it together as to one thing and we say, what's going on here? We need to get together and we need to figure out what's going on, because now we have some institutional control issues.
Is this sub varsity or just varsity?
Oh, you muted yourself, Tim.
To me, a roster is a roster is a roster. If you're not doing your rosters, you need to get your rosters done. And the problem here is, it's institutional. We got to get this under control, because we're seeing too much of it.
Yeah, and I would say a couple things like pre to the fines that need to be figured out is how you reported it. Like if you're the school who notices it's a violation and you're playing the person who's violating the thing, how do you report it? How do you go about it that you're not doing it in a way that creates unnecessary tension between the two schools? And then also the immediacy of the penalty of it, right? So like, is it, if it's happening on a game day, are they getting fined the next week? Is it not being like investigated and done until 6 months later? Like how does that all, those are kind of some of the questions that I've had as I've gone through this a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the reporting of it is simple of just emailing me, or if it's something more specific to something Bart would, need to know, but mostly it's me, just emailing me, hey, I saw this come up, I can investigate the situation. Depending on what it is, sometimes we ask that you reach out to the school first, but you can always reach out to us first. We can kind of guide you on that, depending on the specific situation. There's lots of different things that could come up. As far as the immediacy, as soon as I get a report of something, I start investigating. As soon as I make a determination on it, I try to get a letter out within a week at the latest of whatever that particular case is. So it usually is as soon as that, but not like I don't wait till the end of the season to send something out. They know right away. And also kind of, I think this has come up before too, as far as forfeiture of games. We don't communicate that ourselves because that opens a can of worms of people asking a lot of questions. But we do in our letters now ask if you're forfeiting games, we ask that the school reports that to your opponents. Now, does it happen all the time? No. But we feel that's not really our place to kind of communicate that business to everybody. And the school should be, stepping up there and saying, hey, listen, we had to forfeit because, and they can tell the reason or not.
So, and say, regulations 920 and 922 outline the investigation process and timelines in there. So it is in the NAC.
Thank you.
Yeah. And process wise, like I said, we don't have like a form or anything. I guess if schools are feeling vulnerable reporting that, we don't say where our source comes from. So it essentially does come in anonymous in that sense. Can it be traced back to a school in certain circumstances? Of course, they can kind of figure out where it came from in certain circumstances. But, just the process is just let us know, me, Tim, Bart.
I just think collectively, and I could be way off base here. I think collectively there's tends to be a shying away from reporting because of just sort of the tattletale nature of how it feels, right? I don't think anybody wants to be the school who's reporting the other school. And so I think a lot of things don't go reported because of that. And I'm not offering an opinion on that. I'm just saying I think that's kind of why there's a lack of reporting or a lack of it being held accountable because nobody wants to be the school that does that.
Yeah, I mean, I can't speak for what isn't being reported because I obviously don't know. So you may have better idea of what whispers are going on amongst, schools, but I can tell you in this year there hasn't been a lack of it. There's definitely we have over twice as many sanctions, which were all majority of them reported, than we've had in the past 2 years. And we're not even through all three we're not even through the second season yet. So there's definitely not a lack of it. I think maybe people are starting to get more comfortable with it, making other people accountable. And I don't know if that's just a culture change that's been happening in our state, but people are definitely reporting people. There probably is more stuff out there that's not, but it's happening. So we could just say continue because there's, we're not telling where it's coming from. So
Yeah, I'll say it's I get 3 to 4 reports a week, probably concerns. I'll say of that, probably 90% of them are unfounded or they just don't know how the kid got cleared. The kid is cleared. There's a very small percentage that are actual concerns, just more innuendo that people are putting in situations.
Good to know. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so kind of going back to 302, any conversation on the language that we've had for the tournaments? Does that make sense? Any issues you see with that? I'm missing a period in there, but I'll update that after made.
My concern with this is the amount of paperwork and who's tracking that. Now, would it be something where if it's on the district schedule, our tournament schedule and it's there, do they still need to send that in, or is it only for tournaments that aren't appearing on the official schedules?
So Bart is on this meeting, so if you want to chime in, Bart, feel free. But this is, when we're talking a big district like CCSD and any school that is on that schedule, their tournaments are on that schedule. So whatever they still submit should still have their tournaments on there. But when it comes to the number 3 and the specifics of the date, time, site, location of opponents, all that stuff, the specifics of that do need to be sent in, because sometimes they're not finding out about exactly who's participating until like the weekend before or the week of that tournament. So those specifics that happen kind of later in the process do need to be sent into BART. I don't think they need to, it's up to you guys, but I don't think they need to go through like district offices and that specific information. As long as they're on your, tournament schedule, I think for your purposes, that's fine. But for us, Bart's going to want to know exactly who they're playing so that we can vet that and look it all up and make sure it's all legitimate. So yeah, they'll still need to send it in. But whatever process you guys have for your schedule and having them on, just on the tournament saying they're going to be at that tournament, I think that's fine. But for our purposes, we want the full format, all that stuff.
From each school participating or from the host, or like if I'm going into Arizona and I'm the only school there, then I have to send it in.
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest thing is the ones that are going out of state where we have to vet it in that sense. Yes, for sure, we need all that information from the schools that are going out of state. If it's something in state, again, Bart can kind of, if you want to chime in, Bart, feel free. But I would assume he still wants it from each school that's participating so that they have the full information. But I guess if it's an in-state one, maybe the host just giving all the schools once could be fine as long as they're listed as going to that tournament. The school, reports that they're going to that tournament. If he has the information of everybody that's going, timely, date and location from the host, that probably would be fine. But I don't want to speak for him on the specifics of it. I'm sure if we get this past, that information will come out exactly how he wants that and all those specifics as well.
Yeah, I'll jump in real quick, Bart Davis and I staff.
Thanks, Bart.
Let's give a couple of examples here. Legacy hosts a boys basketball tournament in December that might have an out-of-state team or two. Legacy as the host school would probably take care of that and take care of it for everybody. If we get within that 48 to 72 hour window where we've got nothing, we can send a blast email out to what Mr. Anthium would have listed as all the teams within his schedule that would be participating in that tournament to make sure we have the full schedule. If somebody's going to Page, Arizona to play in their boys basketball tournament in December, like Rancho did this year, I believe, we're going to need that schedule from Rancho. I would rather have that schedule 12 times than not have it at all. But to answer your question about who's going to track it, the guy talking right now is going to be the one who's going to track it. It's good that you have that on the CCSD master schedule. But again, that doesn't tell us if an unsanctioned school, to use the school from a few years ago, Bishop Sycamore, is in somebody's tournament. We can't have that happen. There was a tournament back in January that one of the NIAA teams was in. They're not represented in the room right now, and I'm not going to call them out, that had an unsanctioned team in that tournament. Thankfully, they never met. But we want to make sure that our schools know, hey, you can't play this team. Please make sure you don't even try, because if you do, you get yourself in pretty big trouble.
Thanks, Bart. Anything else on this one?
Is there a list of finable offenses? What things carry fines?
So that's what we're going through right now.
Okay.
Every single one of these regulations is going to go through anything that says, the word fine, fee, where there's an amount, all that. So yeah, this is the first one that we have, but we'll go through all of them. Okay, anything else on the language, specifically the updates that we made with tournaments? So amount then, Tim, when we're looking at this would be one of those, simple fines that you say. So this would be like a change we're thinking to 250 to keep consistent with our.
Yes.
Okay. So how do we feel about that amount for this as a group? We feel like, how do Tim's numbers look? Does that make sense for this?
Yes. Makes sense.
Any other
John Grandy,
thoughts?
I agree. The 250 makes sense if we're looking at making that the standard base.
Anything else? So looking at that updated language, and then I would update the 100 to 250. If we feel like this is good and ready to move forward, then I would just entertain a motion. If not, I can always bring it back. If we think there's other things you want to add to it or changes we want to make at a future meeting, we can always do that as well.
Hey, Kate, let me ask you really quick. Number 4, brand new, well, the 2 to 4, it says that I will impose the fee that fails to submit the association a schedule, tournament schedule, or schedule changes. So changes will now have to be communicated to the NIAA as well?
They always have been. Bart has always been communicated with when, like, if you're talking about your big schedule, whenever a change happens there, that's communicated through Xavier. So that's fine. As long as a school is communicating with you guys to make that change and then we're CC'd on it, that's fine. But obviously schools that are not on that schedule should be communicating changes to BART as well. Because not everybody's on that big schedule, across the state. So yeah, schedule changes have always been required to be communicated to us, but we just don't really ever get them from other schools besides.
No, and that's a huge shift, statewide. Yeah, that really needs to be communicated. Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, and if, like I said, if we make these changes, there'll be some communication that outlines exactly what we're looking for and all that, because this is, like Pam said, a big change. Anybody else? So again, looking for a motion if we want to move forward with this. If not, we will move on to the next.
I'll make the motion that we approve the changes for NAC 385B.302.
For a second.
Reggie Farmer, I second.
Okay, we have a second. Any other conversation on this? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
I
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, that passes. I will put this on a workshop for the next Board of Control meeting. Thank you, everybody. We're going to move on to the next page, 11, NEC 385B.342. This regulation is just about recruiting and basically just is saying that, if there's a violation of this, there's some penalties. This one doesn't specify in it the fines that could be imposed, but it references 960, which is where we were just talking about those amounts. Tim was talking about updating those amounts. We'll get to 960. That's going to be our last regulation, but it's basically just letting you know that our recruiting regulation follows that continuum we're talking about, or will follow that if we pass a change to that. So it talks about schools in violation and then coaches in violation, and the fines and suspensions and probation that could happen because of those. So really no change would happen to this regulation, but just know that any changes we've made to 960 would affect this regulation. So any questions on that or conversation on this piece?
So basically just that the fee would apply, or the fine would apply to this as well.
Yeah, a fine, a probation, any of those things could apply to this regulation if we make that change. Any other questions, comments on this one? Okay, we can come back to it if we need to once we talk more about 960 again. All right, moving on to page 12, NAC 385B.564. Again, just another regulation that includes amounts, penalties. So, feel free to kind of read through this. And Tim, if you want to step in, because I know you've kind of looked at these, I just want to make sure you have a chance to kind of talk. This is more kind of your
This is
area where you want to make these changes.
So this one is about an application for sanctioning of a competition or event. This comes from when we host our own tournaments within state, or when you go to an event that's outside of the state, they have to be sanctioned. I think that running an unsanctioned tournament needs to have a heavier fine than $100. This is big because you're potentially playing against teams that aren't. I almost believe this should be a sanctionable offense at the big end. This is important because what we had was, I'll give you the example. We had a school this year who went to a tournament over Christmas, never told anybody about it, then played a game. They violated a bunch of different regulations, but the one that they didn't know they even violated that came out during that whole time was they played in an unsanctioned tournament that we as a state did not give them permission to play in, and the state they were in didn't give the school permission to host. So the state had an unsanctioned tournament and we had an unsanctioned team, technically by regulation, playing in that tournament. And that made me think about that. And when I penalized them, there was some pushback because they said, well, how would we know? Well, you would know because you can't play unsanctioned events. And that's why I believe the sanctioning of events is very important, because if we don't sanction the event, then there's the potential for violation. And we got to make sure we're avoiding that as well. So that's why I think this one needs to be more than $100. I really think that there needs to be some language added that if the applicant doesn't doesn't do the application for the NFHS sanctioning, then we need to up this penalty.
Maybe a dumb question here. What's the why behind this? Is it all liability?
No, well, yes and no. Playing when the NFHS only sanctions one body per state. So the NIAA is the one NFHS sanctioned body for Nevada. Then we decide what schools can participate, and doing so, then we make sure the rules are established across the board. An unsanctioned team does not follow NFHS rules. So, for example, you could be a prep school and you could have 19-year-old kids. If you're not sanctioned to participate and you play in the tournament, you could have some 19, 20-year-old men playing against 14 and 15-year-old boys. So that's one of the main reasons why we sanction it. The other thing is this: other states have rules that we agree to follow if we play in their tournament, or we agree to bring our rules with us to play in it to make sure we're not violating any rules. For example, shot clock was the one that was often used. Sunday, there's some states that allow schools to play on Sundays. We do not. There are other rules that we follow that other states don't have, that we just want to make sure we're playing by our rules and our kids are not violating the regulations that we set forth, because it's kind of hard to say, well, you were playing in another state, you didn't violate a Nevada rule. Well, our rules have to go with you. That's the main reason for sanctioning, in a nutshell.
Thank you.
Tim, does it happen a lot that teams participate in non-sanctioned?
No, it
Okay.
doesn't happen a lot. What happens is they don't tell us they're participating in it, then we don't know. We're very fortunate in Nevada. I'm going to throw Grant Rice out here right now because Grant runs the Tarkanian. We're very fortunate. Grant goes through all the process of that. He communicates with our office. He tells us who's playing. We find out what schools they are. And if he has a school that doesn't like fit, like I'm gonna throw, there's two different organizations in Arizona. There's a charter school organization, and then there's the AIA, which is similar to the NIA. But within that, in their gray area in the middle, there's actually a charter school league that is sanctioned by the AIA. Grant spends a lot of time ensuring that all the schools that are playing in this tournament are playing teams that they can play. Now, what happens a lot of times is you go play in a baseball tournament in California, you just assume it's sanctioned. You don't check. Well, that happens more than we realize. That we go play in tournaments, they are sanctioned, but they didn't follow the proper procedures. So when that happens, you reach out to the school and say, hey, you're not listed on the NFHS website for a sanctioned event. And that way you're protecting your kids and you're protecting that tournament as well. So that happens a little bit more, or they forget to add you, you get added late, you don't appear on the list. There's a lot of different things. The other thing that we have to be careful of too is this. I'll use Mount Sac as an example. Mount Sac is a gigantic track event, but it also includes club. It also includes college. It also includes high school. So we have to make sure that the part our kids are running in, they are in the right sanctioned part, because what we don't want is our kids running against club kids, because that's a violation of our regulations. So that's where sanctioning becomes very important.
Paul, I have a question on this one. What if we just take out the specific penalty and just reference 960, so we have that flexibility of the continuum? Or unless you have like an idea in mind of, Tim, of exactly what you want this to be.
I do not have a specific for that, but I like the idea of referencing 960, because that means then they can be placed anywhere on that continuum that is appropriate.
Yeah.
Well, that begs the question: why wouldn't we do that for all of them, right? Or no?
Yeah, I mean, I don't see why we couldn't.
That might be the easiest way to go, or the most consistent way to go. If there's a fine, then there's one regulation to go to, and everybody understands, that there's a continuum of penalties that exist.
Yeah, because
So,
I mean, we have a lot that do that already, so it's like, why not?
yeah.
have that for all of
Yeah.
them. Okay. Well, maybe then in that case, we might want to revisit our motion and approval of that first
Yeah.
one and change that language.
I mean, for clarification, how I'm understanding it, when I'm reading this 564, the penalty listed there is just for submitting a sanction application too late, like after the deadline.
Or not
So
at
I
all.
think, or not at all. So I think, well, no, that says missing the deadline. So we have in the NAC here in this 564, there's a penalty for submitting your sanction late. What we're also talking about, I hear, is two other things: hosting an event that isn't sanctioned, and then participating in an event that's not sanctioned. So it sounds like there's three separate things. One listed in here, sanctioning within the 30 days, because it's supposed to be done more than 30 days out. And then either not doing it all or participating in an event that isn't sanctioned.
I get what you're saying. But we have, isn't there another regulation that addresses that
566.
piece? No, that's for spirit squads.
Whoops, it's all the words unsanctioned, sorry.
I'm thinking that this is literally about the application process. This is not about participating. Because obviously, like, we have our 7-day
Gotcha.
regulation, like, you know what I mean? We had our other
Yeah.
regulation where if they participate on a Sunday, or this is not, I think this is only specifically mentioning that because that's all that this is about.
Gotcha.
I'd have to go through. These are not the regulations I'm normally well versed in. But it's addressed in other places. And on the flip side, with adjusting 342 or no, not 342, 302, we're also getting into the tournament side of things, like when you're not providing us that information about being in the tournament. So if it's unsanctioned and you're also not telling us, or if we find out it's unsanctioned, but it is addressed. And I'd have to search it, but it is addressed in our regulations because we've sanctioned for it before when they're not participating in a sanctioned event. I'd have to find, but it should be in here. It should be one of the ones we're talking about. Unless we've used this one before, and I'm not entirely
Oh,
sure
yeah.
what we've. So I think for this one, I would just suggest changing that to the language like we see in this previous regulation here. Something of this nature, be fined and placed on probation for, or maybe fined or sanctioned, maybe not the probation piece, but fined and or sanctioned in accordance with the provisions of 960. I think that language kind of makes sense for any of these regulations that are referencing fines and sanctioning and any of that nature. That way we'd only have to change one regulation anytime we want to change the numbers.
Fine. Mhm.
That makes sense. I agree with that.
Got it. All right, so I'm just going to copy some language into my notes so that this, sorry. Let's see. So, sorry, keep going past it. So if we were to say, if an applicant fails to submit the application within the period specified in subsection 1, and if the application is approved, the applicant must pay a penalty. So should we add something, Tim, do you think, to say, like, if you fail to submit it, because this is the thing, if you fail to submit it within the time frame and it's approved, you still have to pay a penalty, but also if you fail to submit it and still,
Yeah, I think it almost needs another subset.
yeah, because you could fail to submit it and then still have the tournament,
Mm-hmm.
Well,
have the
isn't
competition, or have the event, right? Say it
And what
again.
Yeah, and they cannot send, we can find out after the fact.
Right.
So I think we need to have a subset in there that says, schools
So-
failing, something that says schools failing to properly sanction competition or event, submitting the correct paperwork, something of that nature. will carry a penalty or fine, however you want to word that.
Yeah, I think it needs to just be a completely new subsection based on that reading application. Yeah.
What was the remedy to Jonathan's thing that he brought up about the different pieces of sanctioning? Because I agree with him, and I don't. What did we say? What was the remedy to that?
I'm trying to find where because I know we've sanctioned for it before. I'm just in this particular year, we sanctioned for a school that participated on a Sunday. So that was really the main issue. And so we sanctioned for that
We didn't sanction them for the unsanctioned event.
part. So, but I feel as if we've done that in the past, not me particularly, but that the NIA has sanctioned for unsanctioned participation. But I don't know, and if it's not in one of these regulations, which I don't think it is now, I think that might be an issue if that language is not in there.
Agreed.
Now, with that, can we take 566 where it mentions Spirit Squad and connect that
language.
with?
Right, and that's why I'm
Because-
confused. Like, we have specific language for it for Spirit Squad, but we don't have it for anybody else.
Well, but even you look at the title of that of 566 and it doesn't mention Spirit Squad, and subsection 1 doesn't mention Spirit Squad. It's not until the lower subsections 2 through 5.
Yeah, so that regulation is in a subset of our regulations that's just relating to Spirit Squads, if that makes sense. So when you go to like let's see, you know how we have rules regarding specific sports, and it's baseball, and it goes through like the 10 baseball rules and all that. This is a whole section 550 to 566 that all are related to Spirit Squad.
Gotcha.
So that's why it is a little bit confusing when you're looking at it as a standalone, but it's actually, that's where it's located, if that makes sense. So, but I agree, the language that's used here could be added if it's not already in our regulations. And I just find it hard to believe that it's not.
Because with that, Kate, then 564 is within that Spirit Squad subset as well. So 564 is just applying the Spirit Squads.
Oh, is it? Oh, it is. You're right. Yeah, because I just said it was 550. So we're only talking Spirit Squads in this, even though it doesn't reference that at all. Yeah, you're right.
It would almost be better if we
unless
combined 566, 564, let me not combine. If we cleaned up 564 and 566 to make them generic across all sports.
Yeah, and I think we would have
and
to
just take out the specific references like that.
Right.
Number one there, I think we take that out and put in nfhs.org.
Or if we don't want to mess with the Spirit Squad section, I mean, if we connected somewhere over in 302 with the submission of schedules,
right.
schedule and sanctioning.
Yeah, because this is related to that. You know, this is submitting your schedule and also making sure that with submitting your schedule, you are both sanctioning your own events if you're having an event or competition that needs to be sanctioned and participating in sanctioned events. Yeah, I don't think that we need to. I wouldn't change these because these are, like I said, these are within a section that's specific to Spirit Squad. So I wouldn't want to change. We'd have to pull these out of that section, I think. And Paul can chime in at any time if this is not how we should be doing it. But I agree, maybe looking back at 302 and just adding some subsections that have similar language to the Spirit Squads. Yeah, see, I didn't realize when we were first talking about that this was a Spirit Squad regulation. It doesn't even reference it.
You know, my only comment would be that, you know, with all this discussion, and I mean, I don't know that you're going to be able to approve these regs to go forward to the Board of Control in March or April when the meeting is. But if it makes more sense to do it in the fashion you're talking about, then you ought to do it that way. It's just there's probably going to be a little bit of delay in getting it to the Board of Control for review through a workshop.
We would. Yeah, if we need to add a bit more language than what we already have, I think we need to kind of work through that and make sure it makes sense. But Paul, can you think of any other? I feel like we're missing something. There's definitely a regulation about this. I thought about participation. I'm sorry that I'm pulling this up now because I know we have like prohibited, acts. So we have 3:30 with activities on a Sunday. I thought it was within that kind of section where we have, the boys and the girls team, limitations on during the season. And maybe maybe I'm wrong, but I thought there was something regarding the actual participation. But if nobody knows it off the top of their head, I can always do a deeper dive on that. But I thought we pulled every single reg that had anything to do with, sanctioning those words, right? Sanction fee, fine, Tim, I think you pulled everything. So if it's not on this list, maybe it doesn't exist. So I would think at this point, give us a little time to just double check our current regulations and make sure that outside of those Spirit Squad regulations, we don't have anything that already addresses this, because I do believe there's something. And if it's not in there, then I agree with Paul. Maybe we need to go back to 302 and say, that we basically don't want to move forward with this just yet, because we may want to add some additional language here about the sanctioning of tournaments and, that whole process and ensuring that we have that addressed just like it is in the Spirit Squad regulations. Thoughts on that?
So, okay, with that, I need to rescind my motion.
If we want to move in that direction, I agree with Grandy. If it makes most sense, I think, to put that all within that same regulation. So we might just want to add another couple subsections there so that it's all in one place.
I agree.
Any
It
thoughts?
sounds like what we're initially talking about here is the assessment of fines and penalties for different things inside of the regulations, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So, I guess my question is why was this Spirit Squad stuff specifically pulled, or was that not intentional?
So my understanding is Tim went through and pulled any, like, just search language, and it was sanction, fine, fee, anything like that. So we pulled every single regulation that we have that had any of those words in it, just so that we can make sure we're addressing all of it as he's talking about, changing our fine structure. So those are only
I literally searched anything with a dollar sign.
Gotcha.
That way I knew we were pulling out things. And then when I got that
So-
list, I culled it out a little bit.
But am I right in saying that, we have a definition of what a sanction event is and the rules surrounding that, and it's generic across all sports? And if you break that rule, there's the fine for it, right? Or is that,
Yes.
am I not? Okay. So there's not a specific rule for sanctioned events inside of Spirit Squads as opposed to basketball, as opposed to wrestling or anything else.
Yeah, we're not seeing that.
Not seeing it.
So Kate, if it's the desire of the committee to go back and look at potential consolidation of certain regs and that sort of thing, then what Pam mentioned earlier, she would have to rescind her
Yeah.
vote. And the second would have to second that. And then just move on and bring this stuff back to your next meeting.
Do we feel as a group that makes the most sense here? I mean, I'm leaning in that direction just to make sure we're covered on all ends here.
Well, not only covered, let's have some consistency too. So I think that would be good. So at this time, I will rescind my motion for regulation NAC 385B.302.
Thank you. Reggie, do you agree with that?
Yes, I second that rescinding.
Thank you. Okay, all in favor of rescinding, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, that passes. So what we'll do is we'll bring back 302 with the language we have, the updated 250, since we did talk about that. I think we've agreed that's a good number there. And then we'll add any language necessary if we can't find anything else that addresses what we see in those Spirit Squads, so that it's covering all of our sanctioned sports. All right, let's go to so 564 then. In this case, let's just go back here because now we've kind of gone back to realize that this is just talking Spirit Squad. And so in that case, Tim, do we want to still have that language where it's just referencing 960, or keep the amounts separate since we're talking Spirit Squad and currently, our cheer squads are not sanctioned sports? Do we want them to fall under the normal policies as far as our sanctioning, or should we keep that separate since we're really talking Spirit Squad and their processes for competition?
Personally, my opinion is until we sanction cheer, if we get to that point, we keep them separate.
Okay. So in that case, I guess we're just looking at amount here, and if you would like to increase that amount. Because we could still kind of match it to what we're doing if you feel, like 250 is a more appropriate number here, kind of along the lines of all the increases.
Tim, what's your recommendation on this one?
Right, yeah.
250. Keep it consistent.
Are
I don't
you
want to
saying
change
it's
I
outside
don't want to
the-
change their regulation. I just want to keep it across the board as the fine structure stays consistent.
Are we, and just to be clear, we're saying that that we're not going to reference the continuum of fees because it's not a sanctioned sport.
Correct.
All right, any other conversation on this? If not, I would be looking for a motion to increase the amount of the penalty from 100 to 250 for this regulation relating to Spirit Squads only.
Hey, this is Pam. I'll make that motion.
Thanks, Pam. Looking for a second.
I'll second Stallworth.
Thank you, Rollins. Any other discussion on this? All right, all in favor? Say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, that passes. So kind of going along with the same theme, 566, also relating to Spirit Squads. In this case, again, looking just like at a penalty for the school if they're participating in a competition that is not sanctioned. So again, very similar to what we were just talking about with our normal sports, but we're only really talking about Spirit Squads here in that section. So the amount would be 500 here. And again, looking at Tim for a suggestion if that needs to be increased, or if you feel that that makes sense in this particular case.
So on the continuum that I presented, it went 250, 500, 1,000 at a sanction. I think if it's going to be a consistency, this would be a penalty against a school out of sanction, out of participating in an unsanctioned event. I think it goes to 1,000,
Okay.
which is a large jump, but I do believe it's warranted.
Hey, Tim, in your office, who tracks this?
Me, with the assistance of Bart. So Bart tracks. Now this is for cheer. So with cheer, this would be Deb Dowdy and Kristen Grimm. So, but the rest of it would be us. And then they would notify us that they would sanction them for that.
Can somebody give me some examples of how this has been done in Clark County with their cheerleading, and some examples of what has happened?
The only example I can remember, and Pam, correct me if I'm wrong, was a couple of years ago, there was an issue at an event at Desert Oasis, but that got cleared up before the event occurred. That it hadn't been sanctioned, but they got it all taken care of and had it sanctioned. So this, I'll be honest with you, Rollins, I cannot tell you this happens very often because cheerleading does follow such a rigorous with who they bring in to score, how it's handled, and how they allow teams to enter. I don't think they can even get to this point very often without having a sanctioned event. This would be someone going off on their own set of tracks and doing their own thing. For the most part, I don't think this has occurred. Well, I know my tenure, I never heard of it except for once, and that was just simply they hadn't had the paperwork done correctly, and they got it done in plenty of time.
Okay.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, Debbie does a great job up north and for the state, and she collaborates with Kristen. So Tim's absolutely right.
Okay.
Yeah, and as far as I know, like there's really two bodies that host competitions for Spirit Squads, the NDA and the USA, and if it's in town, everybody's going to it. Like the only other body I know that does stuff is the NCSAA, which is the middle school kind of charter schools and choice school league. They do put some spirit squad stuff on, but as far as I know, that's all just middle school sports.
And I know you can't even get varsity to score it for you if it's not sanctioned. So, I mean, even that aspect even gets a little even more deeper. So I think this is a rarely used regulation that provides us nice language to glean out to create our own regulation for athletics.
All right, any other discussion on this one? All right, this time just looking for a motion to increase that amount from 500 to 1,000, just to kind of be along the same lines as what our hopefully adjusted sanctioning and fine structure looks like.
This is Pam. I'll make that motion.
Looking for a second.
I'll second.
Any other discussion on this? All right, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
I,
Any opposed? All right, that passes. Thank you. All right, moving on to the next regulation, 702. So this regulation is our rostering regulation. So a violation of a school that does not have their students rostered before their first contest, as well as having students that are on the roster that are ineligible, or students that are not on the roster and participating. We kind of use this in all of those ways, as far as just any issue with your roster essentially is using this regulation. And so again, this would probably be a regulation where we would just reference our new, continuum there in 960 versus adjusting the $100 to the 250, because we want to kind of reference that continuum piece of this. So I would suggest in this case that we just adjust that language to state something of the effect that, a school that violates subsection 3 may be fined in accordance with NAC 385B.960. That kind of language would make the most sense here. Any other thoughts on this one?
We need to change the fax machine language. Or are you going to keep that?
Yes, no, we can definitely and I think, well, here's the thing. That has been removed, I believe.
It has. It was by
Yes.
method approved by the association.
Yeah.
The language
We
says.
did, yeah, we did already remove that language from this one. Let's see.
Would you just alter number 5?
Yes, let me share something. So this, sorry, this language was let me stop sharing and show you the updated. We haven't got the signed one back, I don't believe, for this regulation. Can we all see that now?
Yeah.
Okay. But we had already approved this because this was one of our regulations in our transfer section that we kind of talked about. So we did adjust through a process and then to be submitted. So ignore some of that language. We're really just looking at the fine amount of this. The rest of that's already been updated. So we would be just updating that once more. So subsection 5, like you said, would just that language just be adjusted there to say a school that fails to comply with subsection 3 shall pay a fine in accordance with the provisions of NAC 385B.960 would really be the only change, but the rest of that has already been adjusted prior.
Nate, where do I find the dates in which a student can be added to a roster of a particular sport?
We don't have a regulation that specifies that.
Okay.
Yeah, there's certain sports where it could affect their ability to play in postseason, more on the individual basis. But in general, as long as they're eligible, they can be added at any point during the season.
And a
Sure.
student who participated in a sport, and went, let's say a kid played over half the season and quit that sport, that kid would stay on the official roster even though they quit. They wouldn't be taken off the roster to say that they never played.
So
Would-
yeah, they would be removed from the roster, but we have roster history. So like, for instance, if we're talking about a transfer, this is a little bit off topic here, but if we're talking about a
I'm
transfer.
sorry. I'm
No,
sorry.
you're good. You're good. I just to clear it up. I can see if that kid then transfers in the middle of that season that they were on a roster, and I have the dates. So they should be removed from the roster once they're no longer on it.
A couple questions. So when we talk about the initial roster being prepared by the school and then sent to the association, is there any wisdom in outlining exactly what that means in regards to the roster? Like every bit of the roster, do you need numbers on there? Do you need height and weight? Is that not considered a complete roster if all of those things are not on there?
I think that's a
Because I
good
know,
point.
like,
Yeah,
ahead.
no, I think it's something that we've talked about before where, our expectation is that they have their jersey numbers, they have their positions. And that's more of like a procedural thing that we've communicated out. It's not in our regulations. So I think that's a good point. If we wanted to also add some language as to what that looks like, I think kind of following what Bart did with 302 and adding, I need this, this, and this for your schedule, and very, very clearly laying it out in a regulation, like, hey, if you don't have this, that's not a completed schedule. I think in the same vein, adding maybe that language when applicable, because obviously we have sports that it's not, but when applicable, the jersey number and, position of the student for each sport is, required to be a complete roster of something of that nature. Yeah, I don't disagree with that at all.
Yeah, I'm speaking mostly on lower level sports here because when the season starts, most rosters are okay, but the numbers thing is usually very rarely complete, and then I don't know what that means either for like, okay, so the numbers are there, but they're not correct, right? The kid is listed as 53, but he's wearing 16, so I don't know how that all applies to the roster being submitted in time.
Yeah, I mean, even adding maybe language to say as changes occur to the roster, those changes occur to the team, that's reflected in the roster, whether it be jersey numbers, positions, kids dropping, kids adding. Obviously, we know that it's kind of a flexible roster, and it's not, the day it's submitted or checked by me, it's not complete in the sense that it may change throughout the season. So even just alluding to that might be beneficial. So,
And I have one.
Oh, go ahead.
I have a question on number 4 as well, just
Okay.
to gather some thoughts on it. Like, so spring season specifically, like this year, right? Official start day is the 15th. Official contest day is the 27th. That's exactly 10 days after. It seems to me to not be prudent for us to allow games to be scheduled on that 27th, on the 10th day, because to me it allows for very little wiggle room in regards to having those 10 practices. Like, it could be something as trivial as, like, let's say the coach is sick and he can't host that practice, or something happens and the practice can't be done, right? So maybe it's something within the school that's been planned a year out where that is taking away. Am I making sense here? It seems
Always
like
remember, Si, that you don't have to start on that first day either. You don't have to. So we
On the
have to set a
15th.
date that we say this is the earliest you can compete, but a school can always move their schedule out. They don't need to start that first day. I would say that no matter what day we put, somebody's always going to want to go right up against it. So we set that date as the minimum number. But if a school says, you know what, we're not competing that first week, that's fine. Which, they do a lot in the fall with the schools, with the lower levels, because they don't have time to build their programs up because the kids haven't arrived yet. So I think that date's, while it's a hard and fast date, starting on that date is obviously school choice, and we'll always have that flexibility to allow schools to say, hey, we're not starting the first day. We're going to start day 2.
Yeah.
We're going to wait till the end of the week and go there.
that makes sense to me. I think I was more referring to the 10th day.
Yeah,
when contests get scheduled on that 10th day.
I would personally,
It's-
I would hate to schedule a game that day because you just don't know if your kids are going to be there and ready to go.
Enough, yeah.
Okay.
Anything else? So what I can do for this one, unless you want me to try to kind of put the words together for the Jersey part, which I can always bring this one back with the updated language that, we've pushed onto the LCB. So cleaning that up to have that language so you can kind of see all of that together with adding the piece about referencing 960. And then I can add that Jersey number, position, and kind of wordsmith something in there under subsection 3 about what it means to actually have a completed roster. Unless you feel like you want me to do that now, which I can if we want to move quickly on it. But like I said, this one's already in the LCB, so this would be a matter of sending it back to that. Like it's already kind of in the middle of the process. So I don't know, Paul can maybe shed light on that, what that process is like if we say, hold on, we need to send more adjustments to it, how that's going to all work. But this one's kind of in the middle of that process already.
Yeah, it's a problem if we have it, because it's still pending on the other changes that you made. So it's probably
Right.
something that's gonna have to wait, Kate.
Then why don't we, in that case, why don't we just wait on this? I'll do the updated language with some of those changes to 3 and 5. We'll bring it back to the next meeting. Hopefully by then, the language will be done, and then we'll be sending it back as, hey, I know this was just approved, but we have additional changes, and we'll go from there.
One more clarification on number 4. Does that reference the regulation on the minimum number of practices? And then is that a finable thing as well?
Any violation of a regulation could constitute a fine. This is just simply stating this is basically where we get our numbers from as far as the first official practice. We have that date elsewhere, and then we have 10 days after that is when we can have the first contest. So this is just where we kind of get that number on our calendar for. This is the first day
Right.
of the season that you can have a contest. So yeah.
And we did find
But
somebody for this year.
But that
If
10
it's-
number is arrived at. That number 10 of days is arrived at by the regulation that says a kid needs the minimum number of practices, right? Where the team needs to hold the minimum number of practices before the first game. That's how we get to that 10 days, right? Am I wrong about that?
I
You're
think
right.
that's accurate, isn't it?
That's accurate. Yeah, we have a regulation that says minimum number of practice days before, and that's the 10-day minimum number of practices, the 10 days after the start before the first contest. That's which regulation is that, Kate?
708. So
708. That sounds right.
3.
So,
It might be
so
708.
then it's really kind of 2 separate finable offenses, right? The
Yes.
school could schedule a game outside of that, but they could also have a kid participating who hasn't had the right, or a team participating that hasn't had the correct number of practices.
Yes, it's double-edged. Yep.
Yeah. All right, anything else on this one? Any other changes you want me to bring back for next meeting? Good. All right, so again, my plan on that, just make those adjustments, show you what it looks like currently, if it gets approved in the way that we have sent it with the new changes to 3 and 5, and we can take a look at what that looks like after that. All right, Tim, do you want to talk about 880 where it has all the fees for broadcasts, obligations, all that stuff?
So this is not under the bailiwick of fines for violations. As I've gotten into this role, the one thing I've learned is that our broadcast rights are very vague for people to understand. What I would like to do is I would like this committee to empower me to go and redo this regulation and bring it back with new numbers and new language before we delve into it. Because what I've discovered is there's a very we'll just go through it right now. Right now we have the NFHS network out there, and we're also having to deal with Huddle coming in, and who owns the rights and what we can broadcast and how we can broadcast and who pays for those rights. I also think the fee structure is too low. considering it's been that way. If you look at the bottom of the regulation, I believe it's been that way since either 2004 or 2011, which means we've really upped the amount we're doing of our broadcasting. So I think what I would like to do is I'd like to reach out to other states and see what they're doing with their rights and their fees for their rights, and come back to this committee with a new 880 for everyone to review and discuss. If that's okay with this group, I would gladly get started on that. I can tell you that I've already have in the background a little bit, reaching out to other state associations, but also to clear up exactly why we do what we do and how we do it. And so that schools that have other avenues to broadcast events have that opportunity. Please understand this is not going to impact our schools that have broadcast journalism. We've already got it set up pretty well with them on how they're doing it and where their feed goes through the NFHS network. The other concern I have is Play On and the NFHS network and their collaboration and their consolidation is going to change the dynamic as well. And I think the Huddle platform is going to change as well with their tie-in and YouTube. So I want to make sure we have this clear and we can share it with our community, because I will tell you, I've had the same conversation more than 5 times with schools saying, but I can broadcast it through Huddle. It's my feed, yada, yada, yada. I want to clarify that so we have clear and distinct lines of delineation and process and procedure in place.
All right. Anybody have any comments on that? Otherwise, we'll just move forward and have Tim bring this one back. Excuse me.
So if we get contacted about somebody wanting to cover the game, we should point them to you guys? Is that what I'm hearing?
Yes, usually what happens is, here's the best and cleanest way for this to occur is Finn Pendergrass is the guy from Play On in the NFHS. He will contact me and say, Tim, the network wants to broadcast Faith Lutheran versus Durango basketball next Tuesday. I take that email, I forward that to you saying, hey, these guys are good, please work with them. And then they work through it and they do the whole thing. That's the cleanest and easiest way. Sometimes they will reach out to you guys, just reach right back to me and I'll tell you, yep, good, or no, we need to work on this. So whatever the case may be, I'm usually somewhere in the middle, transmitting it one way or the other.
All right. Anything else on this regulation before we move forward?
Yeah, just for clarity, is this for postseason events or regular season? Sorry if I've missed that information.
It's for all events, Ryan. We'll set it up so it can cover all events.
Okay, so right now, following Sai's comment, a regular season event, local guy wants to broadcast a regular season basketball game, they need to contact the NIAA for that?
Yep. And like, for example, Ryan, like the Friday night football up here in the north, they contact me and give me the list.
Okay.
Yep. And if it's going out on the network, it's clean, it's simple, and it just moves right along.
And so for next year, like for Reed, we're getting huddle cameras everywhere in every facility. It was explained to me that the school keeps, I think it was 60%. So, and we can regulate our own prices for pay-per-view. Is that something we have to work with you on
Yes.
before we put it out there for pay-per-view? And does the NIAA make money on regular season games?
We don't make it on that sense. What we have is our agreement with the NFHS network. So they have the right to first refusal. And for the most part, if it's a regular season game, they'll pick and choose which ones they want to go through. And then it goes right back to the school. So your agreement with them is over here. The NFHS network is above and over here. And we work between the two to make sure we get it done correctly.
So there's a possibility that we can't show our game on Huddle because you are collaborating with NFHS network.
There is a possibility that what they could do is take the feed directly to the NFHS network. It would still exist on Huddle, but it would also feed through the NFHS network.
Interesting.
Yes,
Okay.
it is. It's very interesting. And Huddle knows that they are supposed to work through the state associations on these things. And if they have some questions, they can reach out to us.
All right. Anything else on 880? Okay. Let's move down page 17, 922. Again, this is similar to the regulation that I referenced earlier that is just referencing our current fine structure that we have, 960. So there wouldn't need to be any language changes here. It's just to let you know that if we make changes to 960, this regulation would be affected. And basically all this is saying is that schools have to cooperate with the association whenever there's an investigation. And if it's found that they fail to cooperate in whatever way, they could be fined, placed on probation, suspended following that provision. So no changes here. Just wanted to make you aware that this would be affected with any changes we make to 960. Any questions on that, this regulation? We'll move on to 960. So this is our big one. Again, this is really the regulation that dictates all of those numbers for any sanctioning of any violation of any regulation. Tim went through his ideas of how to increase this. So at this point, I think what we would want to do if we feel that we want to make those changes is have this rewritten following that language that Tim has, since we'd have to add a few sections or subsections here for the first offense, second offense. That type of language is not here. We basically just say that, you know, if you have a violation of any regulation, we can fine you up to $1,000. The probation piece is $2,500. So if the school is placed on probation, you can impose a fine up to $2,500. And then if you're suspended, you could be imposed a fine up to $5,000. So I think some of those numbers will stay the same, but some additional subsections need to be added with the fine of $250 and the second offense piece that we were talking about earlier. Anything else on this one, or any thoughts on kind of what we talked about in the beginning of going over these and how we feel about that?
You ready for a motion?
I'm ready if you're ready.
All right, of course I am. Okay, I'd like to make a motion that that the fees are rewritten to reflect Tim's recommendation for fee structures.
You're looking for a second?
Jim Pace will second.
Thanks, Jim. Any other discussion? Okay, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, that passes. We'll bring this one back with updated language, new numbers, and review that for our next meeting. All right, moving on to page 19. This is not about fines. This is our dues, but also related to money. In our last Board of Control meeting, NEC 385B.212 was updated. And so this is a reflection of those numbers that were already approved by the board. And what I did here is just kind of outline the 3-year process. Part of that was also that prior to the 27-28, ending of that school year, that this is revisited to talk about where we're moving after that date. So this regulation will definitely be changed again prior to that school year, but this at least outlines very specifically the amounts for each year for both types of schools. I just kind of reorganized it as well so that we have our schools that have less than 600 and our schools that have more than 600. So it's easy to understand kind of where you fall in your amounts for each year, just making it as simple as possible for people to understand. And that was really it there. Like I said, this was already approved by the board. So these changes then going back to the board, I'm pretty sure will, be approved since they were okay with these numbers at that time. Any questions? Yes.
Subsection 1A, it should be 1,200, 1,300, 1,400.
Oh, did I not put the new ones in here?
You got B perfect, but yeah, that should be 1,200, 1,300, 1,400.
I did change that though. Let me see. I'm so sorry. I just want to pull up. I might have just pulled the wrong packet because I didn't see those. Let me see here. No, I'm so sorry. I did make that change. Now I'm thinking I just pulled up the wrong packet.
Quick question while she's looking that up. what was the reason behind 600 being the dividing line? Was there any specifics on that?
That is the line between Bart, I'm going to bring you in on this. Wasn't that the line between 3A and I don't remember how that line came into be. It's been there forever.
No, the line between the 2A and 3A is at 450,
450,
451.
yeah. I
That
don't
may
know
be a
why.
question more for Mr. Anderson than for me.
Okay, Paul? I can't remember not being there.
And I'm not sure on that. Sorry.
Okay, I don't know, but we talked about this, Tim, and I did make that update on a document.
Mhm.
So sorry about that. But yeah, so it's 1,200, 13, 12, 13, no, 13, 14, and 15. Correct?
Yeah.
13 for, yeah.
13,
Sorry about
14,
that.
15. Yep.
We did talk about that, and I did make that adjustment, so I don't know how I missed that. Sorry. So for one, just so that we're clear, I'm gonna write this down and make sure I make these adjustments. Because these numbers were already updated at some point prior to this. So 1,300, one should read 1,300 for the 25-26 school year, two should read 1,400, and three should read 1,500. Sorry about that.
Hey, Tim, you and I had this conversation this weekend. I don't believe that we should put the fee structure in there that outlines year 25, so on and so forth, because as you know, those of you who've been on the board for a while, we still have pending regulations that have been sitting the LCB for 2 years. I believe, again, this isn't needed, but I believe what we should put in there is something about the fee structure, whatever is approved by the Board of Control. As opposed, because again, we have regulations that we as a board approved 2 years ago, sitting at the LCB.
I don't disagree, Pam. You know that. I think if we leave out the amounts, we're not going back and having to redo this every 3 years or every 2 years or whatever it is. So I think if we were to just say, except by otherwise provided school enrollment of less than 600, we'll have rechange the wording to A and B, just so that it stipulates between 600 and above.
Yeah, because also every realignment you will have to then, or not every realignment, I take that back. But after year, 2028, you're
Yep.
back where we're at right now.
Don't disagree with that. Yeah, so we could just make it as simple as if a school enrolls less than 600 pupils during a school year, the annual dues for the membership of the school in the association is a specific number, is something to the effect of that. It's a one fee for that. It's not by pupil,
Right.
as determined by the Board of Control, and then with B, is a per pupil amount as determined by the Board of Control. Okay, I'll readjust it. I'll bring this one back too, and I'll just readjust it and make it make sense so I can bring it with actual language.
Make it easy.
Yep, I agree, because then it doesn't need to be changed year to year, and then the only time you would change it is we change that number, that 600 number. Okay, I will bring this one back with that adjusted language. I agree with that. Anybody else have any comments on this? Okay. All right, looking at 910 on page 20, this is our regulation about appealing. Tim wanted me to add this one on here as our level 2 appeal fees are pretty high. We're paying quite a bit for all of these appeals. Even when it's affirmed that our determinations are correct, we're still taking the brunt of the cost on that level 2 appeal, that the parent is the one appealing and wanting to have. So right now they just pay a non-refundable fee of $500. We can waive it if they apply for school, free school lunches, in which I think at this point pretty much I think everybody does, or a lot of people do. And that's right now not covering a lot of the fees that we're seeing. So Tim, again on this one, do you have a number that you feel makes the most sense to? And I know you had language about possibly changing how the outcome is, if that affects the amount, things like that.
Sorry, muted. You know, I'm really torn on this because our costs are, we're dealing with large amount of cost for every appeal. We're not talking, this is covering maybe a tenth of our costs, 10%. And you know, there's a part of me that finds this as a crutch for our schools that don't want to make the hard conversation, don't want to have the hard conversation with the kid. You can appeal, and they go to level 2 only to have us reaffirm what has been affirmed 3 times. So with that being said, I think we need to make this more of a threshold that they have to cross where they're solid in their argument and that they really do believe they have an appealable and a substantial case for an appeal. Because right now I think it's too easy and the costs for us are so high. I can't really tell you that whether we're winning or losing is really driving this for me. It's not. What's driving me simply is the cost of an appeal between the hearing officer, our legal costs, our transportation costs for everybody going down. I want to tell you a single appeal is running us probably close to $6,000 at this point with the hearing officer and the travel and the time, and $500 is just not cutting it for me when it's too easy. And our number of appeals has been going up steadily for the last, well, post-COVID. So, Kate, you can address the number of appeals we've had, and Paul, you can address the costs associated with it as well. But I think we need to look at something like that. I don't know how firm our standing would be, but there's almost a part of me that wants the loser to pay the fees. And I don't know if that puts us in a new realm, but at the same time, at least if they know they're going to be stuck on the end for our costs or a substantial fee, a part of our fee, perhaps they'll second guess it or listen to the first appeals result, listen to the second appeals result and say, okay, that's good. But I don't know. That's just me.
So this is Paul. Hey, one concern that I have is that, I mean, a lot of agencies, you know, that's just the fact that there's an appeal of a regulation that somebody disagrees with. That's looked at as being a cost of doing business. The fact that we charge $500, I think, is unusual. And so upping that amount, even though we do have the exception that if you're on free and reduced lunch, then, you know, the fee can be waived. I just worry that there's going to be some significant pushback if we up that fee, saying, you know, there's those people that are in the middle that, you know, may not, you know, they're either a private school or something where there's not, you know, free and reduced lunch available, but they can't afford the fee. You know, you're in essence depriving them of due process based on what they can afford. And so, you know, I that concerns me that could be raised as an issue, and I'm not so sure it's one that we would prevail on.
I kind of feel the same. While I know our costs are really high for these, I feel like the conversation needs to come back to the administrators at the school and having, you know, reviewing the regulation, talking through. I think there's a disconnect. There's a process, right? You know, the kid comes to you as a hardship situation, they're ineligible. I don't know that those conversations are being had where, you know, they're actually calling that parent up and not just processing everything through Activate and say, yeah, give me this, give me that, give me that. Letting the parent think that, hey, if I just submit all this stuff like they're asking, I'm going to get approved. I think there's just a missing piece there where administrators need to be calling these families when they see a student coming in that's going to be ineligible and having to file a hardship or whatever the case may be, and talking through what regulation, you know, what the regulation is that they're, you know, in violation of, or, you know, their kid's ineligible because of, and talking through the process of the hardship, talking through the process of, listen, you know, here's the probability of you being approved based on this. This hardship is typically not approved. And really talking through those specifics. I think that's not happening anymore since we've gone all online. It's just easier to just do everything through Activate, not have to talk to the parent, send them an email, hey, I need this, that, and the next. They upload it, you send it in, and your hands are clean. And then it's to the districts, the big districts or the NIAA to be the bad guy to say, hey, you're ineligible. And all of a sudden the parent is, I've been working on this for a month and nobody told me my kid was going to be ineligible. I had no idea. So I do think part of this needs to come back on the administration. We need to really train them up on those conversations and how to have them and how to be more knowledgeable of our regulations and this process and really push it back in that sense. I do kind of have the same feeling of I don't want to make it an unattainable thing for those families that truly do feel they have a case for an appeal, but just don't have the funds to do it. Anybody else have any thoughts on it?
Well, Pam, we can go back to some of the cases that we've had to deal with as a district, and Tim, you can too as well. I think a lot of the appeals could be reduced if we put a little bit more pressure on the school's administration and or my office and or Pam's office with regards to a meeting and communications very well in terms of understanding the rule, because I think a lot of times it's just a lot of lack of communications on in the early stages of what's going on. And if we have done this to a kid, then they have done something wrong that broke one of our laws or regulations. And I think a lot of times it's more about, oh, well, I've heard that other kids have gone to the hearing and got cleared and got a chance to play and all that. And I think if the school and their administration, along with the NIAA, and the parents sit together prior to a hearing or anything, which they should be paying for, I do think that that would be the middle piece where the action has been served, everyone understands what exactly happened, and my guess is we would get the school and the administration on our side to help deal with this parent that they have, because right now what ends up happening is the school goes, oh yeah, parents, we support you, we're fighting for you, go fight the NIAA, and they throw it on the NIAA's shoulders instead of the school taking some responsibility as well, saying, we support this rule, we support this aspect, and do that.
Kate, I think something that you said about the training for administrators, there's a lot of new people in these positions and that are not very versed on what to say and how to help parents understand these things. So I think if we want to, like Rollins said, put a dent in this before it even gets to the NIAA, those trainings would be magnificent. I'd be 1000% in on those for sure. I would love that to happen.
Definitely.
I mean, I can speak from my standpoint. I know a number of denials that I made when the parents have had questions. I do work with the school. I'll get on the phone with them. I'll talk to them. I will send them the NAC. I will highlight the points of the NAC on that. And I'll even tell the assistant principal, like, hey, they're trying to argue X. They need to argue X, Y, and Z. Our documents that they've submitted confirm what we've said. And even then, the school, and I've had some schools do a great job going back and explaining to the parents, but we do have, I think it's kind of our culture, our current mode in society where I'm going to fight for my kid and try anyways, even though they know it's a losing battle.
Yep.
And it doesn't matter, I could say I've had a couple that are absolutely, there's no way around it, but they're still going to try and come and plead a sorry case to try and get sympathy for their kid, even though they know that they're in violation of the rule.
In the past, that fee was always what we always thought was the deterrent. It was, man, if they got to go pay this fee, they're not going to do it. Well, if you go through the most recent years, for some reason, we have waived the fee, we have not charged the fee, we have our attorney and everybody else going through these processes and having these meetings, and we're still winning most of them. I would agree, Paul, that we're still winning the majority of these, but still you know, it's not a deterrent, and because they know that we're going to probably do this for free. So, you know, I don't think so. I think we need to make sure that we focus on that middle area of meeting with the parents, the schools, the NIAA, all getting together and have the NIAA and our staff and our peoples at these meetings, put pressure on these parents, and not on the parents, but on the schools to follow our rules. And they need to be the bad guy, not us.
I'll play devil's advocate just a little bit now, and I do not disagree with the idea that having more training will help the athletic directors help the parents and educate them. I will say, though, I think no matter how you slice it, there's a little bit of subjectivity in every transfer, especially when it comes to hardships. And it is, you know, I think that's where for an athletic director, it's very difficult to ascertain to one parent what your hardship is and is it valid? Because at the end of the day, I don't have control over whether the NIAA deems it valid or not. Now, we have a list of things that are considered hardships, right? But we've all been doing this long enough that there's 1,000 ways to slice that hardship and how it, and depending on who the family is and where they're coming from, the documentation that they can get to prove said hardship is just a little bit outside the purview of the athletic director. It's very hard for us to tell a parent, hey, you know, yes, you transferred mid-year. So by the rule of the NIAA, it's very simple black and white language in the NAC. Like this is not going to be approved unless you can appeal it with a hardship. And now this is where the gray area gets to. And for me as an athletic director, sitting with the parents saying, here's what is commonly seen as a hardship. You know, I can do the very few ones that I know that won't be, like offering of programs at certain schools, you know, preference of academic strength of a school. Like I can say those things to a parent that are not considered hardships, like full on through. I do think though, no matter how much you do, there's a certain piece of it that is still subjective, and it gets hard for us to tell the parent, hey, don't do this because they're not going to approve that hardship, because at the end of the day, I don't know that they're going to or not. I mean, Kate and I stay in pretty good communication about transfers, and you know, I just to play devil's advocate, I do think there's that piece of it that's somewhat a little bit more gray than.
Yeah, I think you brought up a good point. What we don't need is we don't need administrators making the determination if they are unsure. If it's something where there's like, okay, you kind of have a case for something here and you understand our regulations well enough, you can support a family and okay, here's some of the things that we need from you. If you're saying you have a medical condition and this is the reason for this, please give me the documentation to provide that. So it's really more of knowing what to ask for, and then submitting that for approval is not necessarily the issue. Once you submit that, if I then deny it, we're talking that middle ground from, okay, it's been denied. And look, she's explained it to you right here, and just reviewing that explanation, because a lot of times they read it and they just see a big, huge paragraph and they're like, I don't know. They just said I can't play. And so it's really digesting that piece of it. Like, listen, this is why it didn't qualify. And, you know, that then kind of deterring them from that point of moving forward. Like, it's been reviewed. You've provided everything you said you have. It's been denied. So I think it's even more that part than the initial application to try to appeal it, which is not the issue. We're fine with that. If there's a case for a hardship and you're working with a family, I have no problem reviewing hardships. It's then once it's denied and they've been given an explanation, we need to kind of have that conversation there as well to say, okay, well, this is what they said and why, and try to help them understand it before they're just like, well, what's the next step? What's the next step? Just trying to find a different answer.
Fair.
All right. So where do we want to go from here? I think we've gotten some arguments for whether we should, you know, increase this number or we shouldn't, and, you know, processes of how we can kind of alleviate some of these level twos. Do we want to move forward with anything? Do we feel we just leave this as is?
I think we should leave it as is after the discussion.
Do we know how long ago it was updated to the $500?
I think it's been the $500 since we've had the regulation. In place. That was the initial amount when we first passed this, which I was back in, I think when the regs were
So it's
taken
2000.
basically from the handbook. So, back in 2004.
2004. Yeah.
Oh,
Well, to Roland's point, maybe that's part of the issue of why it's not a deterrent anymore, is that the cost of the fee hasn't risen with the cost of living, essentially.
Right. And again, I go back to my comments that, if we get to a point where this becomes, I mean, $500 to some people is a lot of money. And if that becomes a deterrent to them exercising their rights and their due process rights, basically, then we've got a problem. So I'd be.
Well, what's the difference? What's the difference between 500 and 100? We say 100, people are still going to say, hey, look, I don't have the money to pay the 100. So, 500 is just a number, but if a parent's not going to pay 500, they're not going to pay 100.
Well, and so what do we say? If we raise it to 1,000 and somebody will pay that, some will pay or some won't. I mean, I don't know what to say in terms of a number, but I just know that we're probably going to get some pushback, and we could end up, I mean, this is one of those things that could end up in court, having to fight over, really, the constitutionality or legality of the regulations. So
are you saying we can have this level 3 or whatever the level is without any fee?
Well, this is level 2. I think the things that you've talked about are if those could be implemented, and if all the schools did comply from the standpoint of truly talking to their students that are bringing appeals that are clearly not those that'll prevail, and being forceful with that, then that would be more the way to go in my opinion. But the thing I'll tell you what bothers me as the attorney for handling these is I get to the appeals and sometimes or a lot of times you see the school there supporting the family, and it's like, you know what, that's not your role.
Yeah.
And that's not something you should do. And take a look at your application with the NIAA. It's in complete violation of the application, which says that you'll honor and follow the rules of the of the NIAA. So, I mean, we got one tomorrow. That's right up that alley, and could affect standings in the 5A basketball tournament. So those are the ones that bother me. And yeah.
Well,
let's leave it at that.
And if I don't see I don't know how many of the people that are in this meeting this morning have even been to one of those appeals at that level. But Paul is absolutely right. I've been in those meetings where the school is acting as the representative and the lawyer for the kid, and actually fighting against the NIAA and the rules that we have of why the kid is ineligible in the first place. And I think one of the things that should take place is that not only the school that they're going to, I think, should be at the hearing, but actually the school that the kid is going from should be involved in this, just as a material witness in terms of what's going on, and change those early hearings and the early process of the regulation, and put everybody on the same page, so both schools involved and or the kids and parents are all on the same page in terms of what actually happened, what rule was broken, and why the rule is being applied in this particular case, and get everybody involved so it doesn't have to go to an appeal in the first place.
Should we hold water until one-time transfer rule gets put in? I mean, is that gonna reduce the amount of appeals? Do we think?
That was gonna be my next point, was that I felt like it may reduce, I don't know for sure, but I would hope that there would be a reduction in the number anyways. So yeah, we might want to just see how that changes, if that gets passed, and how that changes the number of level twos in the next few years.
I kind of agree with that. I think there'll be a reduction in the appeals initially with the one-time transfer rule, but I think after a year or two, they're going to be right back where they're at, just because it's not as automatic of a transfer as we all know here, as people think. So I still think we're going to see some, and probably roughly the same amount.
Okay. Anybody else have any thoughts?
I do. I was thinking too. The other thing I think we should look at is this, and Paul can attest to this, and so can Kate. There's nothing worse than when we get into that appeal and the appeal has completely changed from what was originally submitted. I think perhaps what we should put in here is that you can't go to a level 2 and change your appeal. In other words, only information that's been provided to that point can be added, because if it is going to change, it should go back to the school and start all over again. I think that might change a lot of this as well.
I've been arguing that forever, Tim, because yeah, inevitably we get to hearings and they bring in, 50 new pages of documents that, because they know they failed the first time, they changed their appeal, and the hearing officer allows it, and so I think, yeah, I agree with that. An appeal is by definition is another hearing that reviews the record of somebody who decided in a court below or an administrative level below what the issue was. So it shouldn't change. The record shouldn't change. All you're challenging is the decision for whatever reasons you feel are appropriate. So I agree with that.
Yeah.
I agree with that as well, because I've sat in those hearings as well, when you're sitting there and you think you're going down one lane and then all of a sudden curveball is thrown at you.
Oh, yeah.
Maybe that too could be incorporated in the communication that is sent to the parent upon the denial. That if there's additional evidence or you need to start the process over again. That also puts the accountability back on the school to question if they truly had conversations with parents, or, they did their diligence and got everything that they needed.
Are we able to revise it somewhere to put that in there? Hey, additional documents need to be submitted ahead of time so they can be reviewed. Because I know Kate and I have both said when we've looked at additional documents after denial, okay, now you've provided the additional documentation for the hardship. So why go to a level 2 when we know it's there? So it almost, if we require them to submit that ahead of time, we might avoid some of the level 2s based on if we agree with the additional documentation.
So
you're
again,
saying
I think that goes back to the appeal process, and I think we do one of two things. We either say you cannot submit any additional documentation if you're appealing. If you have additional documentation, I think the comment or the suggestion that was made just a bit ago, I don't know if that was Rollins or whatever, but that you go back to level 1 and you submit it to Clark County Athletics or Washoe County Athletics or the NIAA for another level 1 determination.
Correct.
hopefully that will deter them from doing all that, because they know that that's gonna make the process even longer. And then if we deny again, then you've now just wasted a few more days before you can even get a level 2 scheduled. So yeah, I think that's a good idea. I can draft some language up to bring back.
One more just comment on Paul's comment about the legality of it all, of even finding people at all. Is it the $500? I mean, is there a reason that it is charged? I thought it was to cover costs of the appeal, right? But it sounds like what Tim was saying is that doesn't even come close to covering the costs of it.
Yeah, it was initially designed to cover or offset some of the costs of the appeal, if not all of them. Back in the day, that was, a pretty significant amount in 2004. Now, for instance, I'll just use as an example this hearing tomorrow. We didn't really find out about it until Friday by the time I booked my flight from Reno to Vegas and back, it's $640 because of the late booking, you know, so that goes beyond the $500 fee right there. That doesn't include time. That doesn't include the hearing officer's time. It doesn't include staff
So
time.
are we within our legal right to say that for a family that's wanting to level 2 appeal, that they are responsible for the costs associated with the appeal and to not have a number? Or is that not?
Well, we could
doable?
potentially put in something that, you know, if a party, you know, who fails to prevail at level 2 is responsible for the costs and define what those are. Good luck probably collecting those once they've lost, you know what I mean? And we'd have to bring a legal action against them to collect that, you know, but that's a possibility also, or an option.
But Paul, we can't do that with a student on free and reduced lunch, right?
Right. And you know, and like Rollins was mentioning earlier also, we got to a point where we weren't charging. If you remember back with COVID, everybody was on free and reduced lunch, remember? And I think that just recently was changed to those, you know, with true need, you know, so we weren't collecting any fees in those days because everybody was on it. So everybody got a waiver.
Yeah, I worry about putting language about the fails to prevail, which makes sense to me, but I agree that it's going to be hard to get that money because even they're all like, send me the packet, send me the date, send me this, and they haven't paid yet. So the payment is the only thing that, you know, the not sending them the information is the only thing I can hold to get them to pay the fee to begin with. And, you know, sometimes it's like pulling teeth to get the fee paid. So anything afterwards, I think would be close to impossible to get them to pay, especially when you just told them their kid's ineligible. They're going to be all of a sudden not very available, I think. So.
And the
Wouldn't,
school being responsible for the fees would reduce it immediately.
Could you set up a structure where if they are doing this, there's a minimum, but if they lose, it's this much, but before this even starts, they have to at least put up the $500 or whatever, you know, do that, but in there word it to where it says, you know, in the case that appeal is denied, this is now going to be the cost of what you guys unfortunately occur.
So I like the suggestion Cy just made. I think it was Cy that just said that, you know, make the school be responsible for the costs if they lose. That flips the onus right back to the school of encouraging somebody to go to a level 2.
Yes.
And makes the school really start to look at it.
Hey, Paul, I really believe that the principals on the board will oppose that.
I was gonna say, I don't think anyone would agree to that because we
Well,
have no control over the parent.
I don't understand the idea that you would be responsible for the fees if you lose as opposed to winning. What the fees are the fees. What does it matter if I lost or won?
Because if you won, it basically could technically be saying that the NIAA made the wrong call.
Messed up.
So they
Gotcha.
shouldn't have had to go to
yeah,
the
so they
level
shouldn't
2.
have to pay.
Yeah. But that would be very strict in that we really have to sit there and say, you like the hearing officer would have to agree to not allow new information because I can't make a determination wrong if new information is being presented that I never got. So we'd really have to make sure the language in there is if any new documentation at all is presented, you are not able to go to the level 2, you have to do a level 1 again because I need to make that call before
you need to give me a chance to make a call.
Yeah. Because 9 times out of 10 new stuff comes up.
My opinion is that unless the fee is going to cover the cost of the hearing, there shouldn't be a fee. Because the whole purpose of the fee should be to cover the cost of the hearing. Otherwise, all we're doing is providing a number so that by chance some people will say, well, I'm not doing that. And that seems to go right back to what Paul said initially, which is you can't deny people due process because of financial reasons. So if the number's out there just to do that, that seems exactly like what we're doing. So the fee should cover the cost of the hearing, or there should just be no fee.
And let me also give you an example of what has occurred in level 2. And Kate, you've been there sitting right next to me, and Paul, you as well, is that parents bring in brand new information, and then the hearing officer will look at you and say, hey, based on this new information that we've just acquired, would you change your decision? Come on, Kate, we've been there. Paul, you've been there too. And that puts the NIAA, and that also puts like this office in a bad situation. And that should not ever occur.
Yeah, it
Agreed.
just goes back to the same thing that we've been talking about, I think.
And so one of my responses to you is I think the $500 is also kind of a commitment that they're going to follow through with it, because the NIAA, once it starts, the NIAA is booking the hearing officer, booking the flights, booking the facilities and that. And we did have one this year where the day before the hearing, the family said, you know what, never mind, we're good. And well, they've already paid for Paul's flights and the hearing officer and all of that. So I think you have a lot more families that kind of would maybe string it along if they didn't have some type of commitment to it.
That makes sense. It sounds to me like the course of action here has to do with new documentation being presented at the hearing that wasn't given to the NIAA at the time of the ruling. That would be, Paul, something that would be similar to like in court, right? You can't just provide things in court without the defense having the chance to review the documents.
Well, yeah, so if you want to equate our hearings, which we should, to a court hearing, you go to trial at the district court level, you have your trial, you introduce evidence, witnesses testify, documents are entered, and the court reaches a decision. And the party who loses, if they want, and if they have a basis, they can appeal. And so they appeal. You can't bring any new evidence into an appeal in a civil or criminal legal case. Your appeal is based on what's called the record on appeal, which is what we call the activate file and the documentation in our appeals. And so that is my point, that there should be not a single anything allowed beyond what was in the record.
And if you want to introduce the new evidence, it needs to go back to the school,
right,
so that the NIA has a chance to review it before you appeal it.
Exactly. So get all your evidence in, let the experts, which are the Clark County office, the Washington County office, or the NIAA through Kate, rule on the appeal. And if you lose, then you have a right to take it up, because what you're in essence saying, which would be the same in a court case, is there was an error of law made by the person who rendered the decision. I mean, that's what an appeal really is about. So,
Well, I suppose that doesn't negate the idea that, the appeal could still happen, and then that happens and it goes back to the school, right? I mean, you'd have to still have that forefront piece of saying, when you go to the athletic director somewhere in there needs to say to the parents, you can't go to the appeal with new information. So if you have any new information, it needs to be given now and not do the appeal.
Yep. Definitely. More part of the training.
I think a part of the training should be that the school has to understand they are not representing the player trying to play at their school.
Yeah.
That is the key. That the school has to understand. The training is that the school needs to understand they are a representation of our rule, and that they are following the rules from the NIAA. So actually the parent is actually suing the school and not the NIAA. And because what ends up happening at these things is it becomes the school and the parent fighting against the NIAA rule that the school should be following in the first place.
exactly. You're exactly right, Rollins. I mean,
Do we need to add that to the
I was gonna-
regulation? That language to the regulation?
I was going to say
Documentation.
something regarding school personnel can act as a witness, but not counsel.
Exactly, because that's what I see happening. If you ever go to those meetings, that's what I see happening. And in most of the meetings I've gone to, it's been the school that's been representing the kid at this hearing. It's
Yeah, I mean, I think we should look at that and, you know, and all these things. I don't think there's anything we should approve on this regulation today. I think we should take all these suggestions and look at how we might revise 385B 910. I agree with you 100% on those things, everybody. I really do. I mean, I've often said, you know, the member schools make the rules. I mean, all our regulations are made because that's what the member schools want. And, you know, I always say, hey, you know, everybody loves the rules until it's their ox that's getting gored, you know, and all of a sudden they don't like them. You know, and unfortunately, that's what we see in a lot of these appeals when schools are involved.
Well, you have 2 points of view. You have one school that is supporting this and fighting for the kid. At the same time, you have the other school screaming at us saying, hey, that kid shouldn't be eligible because he left our
But the
school.
problem, Rollins, we get in a lot of these appeals, I can tell you, is the other school doesn't show up and do that.
Oh, no.
Right, Kate? I mean, you know, I've got some recent examples with certain ones that they're not going to send a witness, that it's like, hey, you know, I mean, you know, you're the one losing the kid. You ought to send somebody there to say what happened,
Yeah.
you know?
Well,
I
and maybe
think-
that needs to be a requirement with this, you know, with this appeal.
I think too, I think it needs to be known to the parents too, that if you file a transfer with the NIAA and it gets denied, that doesn't mean that if there's more documentation to be had, that you can't submit it again. Am I right in saying that? I mean, because I think a lot of parents feel like, okay, I've submitted it, it's been denied, I can't go back to the NIAA. They've already ruled on it. So I have to go and appeal it. And I need to get somebody else to look at it besides the NIAA. You know, whereas and I think a lot of times the feeling of parents is that if they submit it again to the NIA with new documentation, it could be looked at as, what were you hiding in the first place? You're making things up now. And I think that's a fear for a lot of parents of you know, that I guess I don't know that, at least I didn't, that was always an option. Like, it's denied. Okay, yeah, well, what about this? We also have this, you know?
But I think that also goes back to the training piece of it, because that does happen a lot of times. Well, this hardship didn't work, so let me try this hardship. And I can see it. And so I've seen it so many times where their initial hardship is honest. It's, hey, you know, transportation, I couldn't get my kid there. I got 3 kids at different schools. Something very simple as that makes sense. Like that is a family decision, but it's a choice. And that we don't see as a hardship because you made that choice knowing your kids were going to be at schools, you know? So, but then they realize, okay, that didn't work. So well, you know, my brother's cousin has cancer and my kids got to go over there and help. And all of a sudden it becomes the story of other hardship things that weren't initially addressed. And so we do see that and think, all right, well, why wasn't this wasn't your main reason? Because we would have started and led with that. So I think part of the conversation is that the training with the APs is to say, what is your hardship? Hear them out, get the truth, and then be upfront and say, listen, that's not going to constitute as a hardship, and we're not going to move forward with it because we're going to be wasting everybody's time here. That is not a hardship. If they come through and say, well, this is also going on, and then they start to become clean about some other things going on and it seems legit, then move forward with it. But if they're coming to you with a hardship and they explain it and you're like, absolutely not, it has to stop there. And I think that's the part that's not happening, is even those conversations are going, oh, well, that's not going to happen. And then they come up with a new story and they're adding new things, and it's just kind of convoluted by the end.
Or the school suggests, well, this would be potentially a hardship, and all of a sudden that becomes the new story.
Right.
You know,
Right.
which is exactly what it is. It's just a story. It's not based on fact.
Yeah. But again, I think
That's my point. That's the difficult spot that the athletic directors are in, right? Is like, you know, at the end of the day, no matter how much we want to say that they're not for the kid, at the end of the day, I'm the athletic director of the school of which the kid is trying to participate in. So and especially for me as a private school athletic director, right? I am in the customer service business, whether I like it or not. That's part of my job is with being with the families and supporting them and helping them and those kind of things. And certainly, Paul, I'm not going to do things outside of what's right, you know, because I do have a moral compass. But I'm just saying that it does put them in a somewhat difficult spot when you're trying to do that stuff.
And I think that applies not just with privates, but I think with everybody. I mean, I think every school, public, private, charter, feels the same way, that people that sit in your seat, you know, because they are your kids, and you do want to help, and you know, that's a natural human thing, and you know, like you say, from your standpoint, it's public, it's a business issue too. So, yeah, it's not easy. All this stuff, it's not easy at all.
So I think for this one, I'll work on adding some language based on everything we've talked about, to bring back. And also, obviously, on the back end, ensure that we have some training for APs going into, you know, next year regarding this specifically, kind of separate from our eligibility. We talk about it briefly there, but a separate training just to really talk about, you know, the hardship and level 2 and denials and all that stuff, because I think that's important, and it does take time to kind of understand it all. All right, I'm going to move on to E. There's no documentation for this one. This was last time we spoke about CIT homeless, Title I, whatever your district calls them, students that qualify under McKinney-Vento and their eligibility. And last time we basically talked about, you know, some options that we have about their eligibility. Could we just give them JV, and then if they want full eligibility, they have to appeal? And my point that I brought up, and Paul and I have had a conversation about this a little bit further, is that we would be in violation of McKinney-Vento if we did a JV only, because there'd be no opportunity for a senior to participate unless they file an appeal and they provide all the documentation that we require. And that is directly in violation of that act. We have to allow them to participate, and we would not be allowing a senior to participate unless they file the hardship, which they should not have to do, or they should get immediate eligibility based on that act. So I don't know that that's really an option here. I think what we can do and what we do in our offices, and, you know, Rollins' office and what Grandy does and what I do, is we can ask some questions, you know, if they move, because they're coming in as a transfer, if we're seeing it. So they've clearly had a change. And a lot of times that is the result of a move. And, you know, they can't provide you a real document of abandonment, a final utility bill or something like that. But they explain, hey, I've been evicted. Okay, show the eviction notice. There's certain things we can ask for that are not out of our jurisdiction to do so, because we do have regulations about, you know, when you move, that even if you don't have a current residence, you're claiming you had one before, show us that. There's going to be situations where there might not be any documentation. And in those cases, we have to approve them. However, if something down the road comes up where we get information that this could have been as a result of recruiting, or the student, we get information that they'd been practicing with this team before all of a sudden they became homeless, those certain pieces of information can then lead to a deeper investigation where we can ask more questions. So I just want to tread really lightly on changing anything in our regulations involving students that fall under this act, and that we are not violating that. So I just kind of wanted to start with that, but wanted to open it up to talk about anything else since our last meeting that you've thought about with this topic. And if not, we can just move off it. Currently, we don't have anything in our regulations about students that fall within this category. We just use the act as our guide to basically say the act says that they get eligibility. So we give them eligibility. We ask the minimal amount of questions that we can. We investigate within our districts if need be, if there's anything fishy going on. But outside of that, our current regulations are, not really apply to those students that fall within the act. They don't have to prove, residency or anything of that nature. Anybody have anything they want to talk about with this? No? Okay, so we'll just stay status quo. If, this topic comes up, or if we continue to see issues of violation that we aren't able to really attack with our own investigations in our districts and our offices that, handle these students, then we can always revisit it and possibly come up with a regulation to help in that case, without violating their rights. All right, we're going to move on to page 21. This is NEC 385B.726, charter school students participating at zone schools. This came up at our board of control meeting in public comment. So I just wanted to bring it to our committee because it did come up from one of our member schools. So obviously there's been conversation about this. I can also tell you it's come up twice recently from members of the public regarding private school students that they feel are not being treated equally because we have a regulation that allows charter students to participate at their own schools, but private students cannot unless their school is super tiny, under 30 students. So before we get to the conversation, I do want to read the public comment that I got about this, and then we can start talking about it, but I just want to kind of preface what this regulation is. So public comment, and this is not in our packet, this came in after the packet was out. So this is from Kemby Bacon DeLellis in Reno. It says, "Dear board and committee members, I am writing to ask for consideration and review of the policies pertaining to NAC 385B 724, 726, 732, 734, and NRS 385B.035. These sections of the handbook all discuss eligibility for pupils that attend various school types that do not offer the sanctioned sports of involvement. The NIAA handbook includes provisions for charter schools, magnet schools, vocational or technical schools, and homeschooled pupils. However, it does not address a gap that exists for students of independent private schools. The limit of 30 total high school students as a prerequisite for private school eligibility seems arbitrary and overly restrictive." And they cite NRS 385B.065, Section 1A. This is the section that I'm humbly requesting the board consider adjusting to allow small private schools to have the same rules of eligibility as other schools, including charter schools, that parents and pupils opt to attend. If the school is not large enough or well-funded enough to be able to offer and carry a certain sport, it still should be the case that a pupil attending that school be eligible to pursue their desired sport. As it stands currently, students of private schools are singled out with ineligibility, where all other school types are considered and granted another option to play. In the case that a sport is not offered for any reason at a school, it is only fair to open eligibility to pursue that sport at another institution, no matter what type of school it is. Pupils who attend any type of school that does not offer a sanctioned sport should be eligible to play at their own public school. This creates a level playing field for all schools that do not have the capacity to offer a variety of sports for their student athletes. What pertains to charter and magnet schools and technical schools should be equivalent in eligibility for private independent schools as well. They have unfairly been singled out of this eligibility, and it affects the students that have to make this choice and consider their sport at times separately than their right academic or social fit. Thank you for hearing this comment and considering a discussion and rule amendment to give private schools the same consideration as other category schools to maintain choices for families. Thank you for considering the students that are otherwise thriving at small independent schools so that they can have the possibility to play their sports at the NIA level and beyond." Okay.
Wow,
So
what school is that at, Kate, here? So she's obviously a parent in Washoe County or in northern Nevada. What school is this child? Do you have no idea?
no, it's just public comment. So no, there's no identifiers, anything in there. So
No identification or anything. And
yeah,
so
this is not.
in looking at the request, how many of those types of schools do we have throughout the state?
How many schools that are under 30 that can participate, or what's the question specifically?
Yeah, the school, so I want to say, I guess this is a private school that has under 30 kids in the state.
I don't know that number. I do know that we've had a very, very small amount that do fall within that can participate. I've maybe had one this year that I can think of that provided the documentation to show that it's that small of a program. But I would say this person is obviously their students at a school that's bigger than 30. So they're like a Sage Ridge or something that doesn't offer a sport and they would like their student to play at their own school.
Yes.
That's what they're arguing here is, they don't have an option basically to play their sport because their school doesn't offer it because they're smaller. An Excel Christian, something like that.
Yes.
I think some clarification that probably would need to be made off the bat is that what they're really asking for, they're asking for the private school to be allowed to choose that, because at the end of the day, I don't think you could tell the private school you have to let this kid go play this at this school. It might be the private school's choice. They're not going to let a student at their school play for another school. I mean, I would think that would be within the private school's choice of whether to do that or not, right? Because it's not, you don't have to go to this school. Does that make sense?
I would say that's probably part of it too, is yeah, I mean, they're paying to attend your school, so you can set the rules and policies of attending our school. If you attend our school, you can't do, X, Y, and Z. So I would think that would be part of it as well.
And that was, can I just jump in? That was when this rule came to be, that was exactly why private schools were taken out. The private schools didn't want these kids. I mean, initially that's why the rule came in. But 385B065, the statute, and Rollins, you'll remember this, Pam, you'll remember this. That came to be, I think, in 2017, that legislative session. There was a kid, I think, in like White Pine County that attended a small school out there that was under 30. He got Senator Gokachia to kind of sponsor this bill. He wanted to play baseball at White Pine or something. And that's how this thing got kind of pushed through. Again, it's one of those rules that's on the book now that applied to like one kid at the time that's causing problems now.
So I think that I'm on the possibly like the drastic other side of this. And I think I have a question for you, Paul, because and it's been brought to me probably, I've been in the 5A, 4A, 5A liaison position for almost 2 years. And every single time I ask for feedback, this comes up. And it's more about, when the NIAA was written, I think there was like 3 charter schools. And now that we have the vast amount of charter schools that we have, why is it that the charter school kids get to, go down the street and play volleyball, come up here and play basketball, go down the street and play another sport? Like that they get to be rostered at 2 different schools during the same year. And again, it's, I understand in the beginning why it was like it was, because there weren't very many charter schools. But the problem that we're seeing is these charter schools aren't going to start expanding, and they're not going to try to create these sports because their kids just can come up here and play.
So
and that was my intention on putting this on there too. Sorry, Paul. I just want to let you know, like, that public comments on the other end of this, but my intention on bringing this up today was because this is what our member schools are saying. They want this removed so that charter school students have to participate at their zone school and don't have that option. Go ahead, Paul. Sorry.
Oh, they want this removed so charter schools cannot come back and play in the district?
They can
That's what
play. Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
You also
So
got to remember too, we have schools in Clark County that don't have certain sports secta. You can go to secta or you can go back. So we also have that regulation that allows that to occur as well.
So
Right.
to answer your question, Tammy, I think you're right from the standpoint that when a lot of this was written, there were not a lot of charter schools. Now there are. The argument though, I think in terms of distinguishing between allowing charter school kids to do this as opposed to small private schools that may not have a sport to go and play for their public school, is basically the public nature of a charter school, I guess. They are a public school, and so I think that was part of the reasoning. It probably doesn't make a lot of sense anymore, but
Yeah.
that's why we're looking at it, I guess.
It's only for sports that are not offered at said charter school,
Correct.
right?
Does this get back into the conversation of co-oping,
No.
or is it different?
No, co-oping would only apply in rural counties. I mean, I think we had that discussion and we're not gonna, if we started getting into that with all the charters in Las Vegas and whatnot, we'd have a nightmare on our hands, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is just allowing a kid to participate at their zone school. So not like 2 zone schools. I think I get where maybe this is where you're going, Jerome, as you're saying, if there's like 2 public schools and one doesn't offer the sport, could they play at the other school? Just a single kid like going to that school, not really the co-op, but like, does it kind of, is that what you're trying to reference there? Maybe?
Yeah, that's kind of where I was thinking, like, I mean, I look at out here with Wendover and West Wendover. I mean, I know we're divided by a state line, but if we offer a sport that they don't, would it be possible for them to come over to our side and play instead of going through a transfer process? You know, it's just we offer it, they want to play it, you know, they're still going to school at their school, but and we would hold them to our standards of what we would need them for eligibility and stuff like that. But we would give them the opportunity to come over and play. I mean, granted, if we were both in the same state.
Right, right. And Paul, I think NRS, that NRS that they reference, 065 in the public comment, in that does state that the Board of Trustees could allow a public school student to participate at a different public school within their district if it wasn't offered, if it was approved by the Board of Trustees. Am I correct in that? I think there's some reference to that in there, if you know it that well. Are you talking, Paul? Is your mute?
Sorry, yeah. I saw I was muted. I'm not sure on that, Kate. I
So
don't
I
have.
thought we had did have a situation in Washoe County this year where the board, and maybe Rollins, you remember this, it had to do with a charter school, but because it's a public charter, it kind of fell under the same thing where they're zoned for one school, or maybe that was a little bit different and they didn't want to play there, so the board approved them to play at a different school. But I thought part of that regulation also referenced like if a school doesn't offer it, because we have a regulation where you can transfer without penalty to a school that does, you know, if your sport's not offered public to public. But I thought part of the NRS also allowed maybe the board of control to approve it if like just if your school doesn't offer it, you can play at that school, but stay at your
And
school.
So two things. First of all, Kate, what was this put on here for today?
So
talk about-
like I referenced, to talk about if we want to make any changes, but the reason I put it on is because it came up as public comment from one of our member schools, and this is talked about, as Tammy said, by a lot of our member schools, that they don't want charter school students to be able to participate at their own schools. And I think Tammy just hit it on the head with our charter schools are not going to expand their programs like we would like all of our member schools to have as many offerings as possible. If they know they can market to students, hey, you can come here. We have these two sports that we're really good at, but we don't have baseball, softball. You can play at your own school. That's a great marketing tool. And they're not going to expand to try to get baseball, softball if they know their kids can go play that at their own schools and those kids will still come. So that was the reasoning.
Tammy, help me with this. Is this also, I mean, I'm trying to figure out where the rub is for a lot of these public schools. So if I'm public school A and I've got a charter school right next to me, in theory, I get my roster sort of bolstered by that group of kids as well in whatever sport that the charter school doesn't offer. Does that make sense? Am I saying that right?
Mm-hmm.
Whereas
Yeah.
opposed to the public school that I might play in league isn't next to that charter school and doesn't get the benefit of those charter school kids. And so is it really a disagreement between the two public schools of like they shouldn't be allowed to get those charter kids when I can't?
I think it's a combination. I think location of charter schools has a lot to do with it, but it's also, well, I mean, I say it all the time. You know, we're not good enough to educate your kids, but we're good enough for them to come play sports for us. Like, you make a choice as a parent. If the choice is that they don't have it at that school, then you shouldn't play it. Because again, we're getting these charter schools that are, like she exactly just said, are we're gonna stack up basketball. Let's just say basketball. We're gonna stack up girls basketball, but then they're not gonna try to expand for anything else because they're gonna say, "Oh, just go play volleyball and run track at your zone school because you can." And so we have kids that are bouncing like they're at charter school or they're with me for fall, they go to the charter for winter, and then they come back to me for the spring. And these charter schools are doing exactly what you just said. They are not expanding like we want them to. They're coming in saying, "Oh, we're going to do this, this, and this," but they're all coming in for one sport, And again, I just personally feel like, and I know it's come to me, it's at first I thought I was the only one thinking this, but then I kept getting all these, as the liaison, I kept getting all the feedback that they're getting the best of both worlds, where we're always the ones that just have to deal with what we have to deal with, basically, is they get to, okay, we're going to go here for school. We're going to play where we want to play, all those things. And that, again, it's basically not fair to the public schools.
The other thing it does too, Cy, is it takes away opportunities from kids that attend the public school.
Yes, that
You know,
too.
especially in a cut type sport or a limited roster type sport, if you have kids coming who aren't walking the halls of your school, you know, why should they be able to play? I mean, I've always advanced that argument. I mean, I've never quite understood this, and I truly believe the most equal way to deal with this, if that was the desire of this committee and or the board, would be to recommend that, look, if you don't attend the school, you don't play there.
Play. Yep.
You play where you attend, and you make those choices
As a
when you
parent, yep.
decide where you want to go. Period. I think that's the fairest way to handle things for everybody. But the pushback that you will always get is, I pay taxes too. Just because I choose to go to a private or a charter, I shouldn't be deprived, you know, of my kid shouldn't be deprived of the right to do whatever it happens to be. So
It
those are the
it sounds
two.
like it sounds like the private schools were kept out of this. It sounds like it's exclusively a charter school rule because of the part of it that is that the charter schools are public, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
the charter schools
That's why it's about charter schools, is because they are a public institution. They're federally, or they're tax dollar funded. Yes.
Right. Yes.
yes.
Yes,
Well, and they're
also,
overseen by by either the local school district or for the most part by the charter school authority, which is the second or third largest school district in the state of Nevada right now.
So we are within our rights to say, if you go to this charter school, it doesn't matter if they don't offer this sport, you can't go to another school to play it.
I think the NIAA can certainly propose that regulation and see what happens. I think that there will be a lot of pushback from the charters on that, and it'll be a battle. But I think we have the right to do that, and I think we have a statute, so an NRS, that basically says that every kid, whether they attend a public school, private school, charter school, whatever, that's a member of the association, all are to be treated equally with respect to everything. So I think the only way you can take this reg, and private schools, you know, are not being treated equally under this regulation, right? So the only way to make it fair to everybody is to say either either add private schools into that, or take both away and just say, as I said earlier, that, you know, if you play where you attend, and you don't have a right to play if you don't attend the school.
I'm
Yeah,
gonna
and
pull
I
up that
guess
too. Go ahead.
I would guess I would argue that I think you have a leg to stand on to say that I don't know that the private schools are not being treated equally, because and correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think it's ever going the other way. If it's a private school kid and the private school doesn't offer the sport, they're looking to go to a public school to play that sport. It's not the other way, where they're trying to come into the private school to play the sport and they're being denied. So the private school in itself is going to say, you know, it's going to be their choice of whether they allow this kid to go and play a sport for a different school besides the school that they're at. Right. I mean, it's not, I guess I just don't see where the private school is being treated unequally there.
Well, I think I think you're thinking of your bigger private schools, to be honest. I think you're thinking of
Which
your
is why we had
bigger
the stipulation.
Right. I think you have your smaller middle of the road private schools that offer a lot of sports, but maybe not everything. I think those are the ones that maybe people are talking about. You know, obviously we're not talking about a Faith or a Gorman or Minogue,
right.
because you
Yeah.
guys have everything.
Yeah, we have a
But
lot
that's
of
why the stipulation is
private
put in there, and it's not it's not saying that you can't go if you go to a private school. It's just saying you have to be a school of less than 30. Now, maybe that number needs to be changed because there's not that many schools that have less than 30 anymore. I don't know if that number needs to change. But that's where I would say that the private schools are not being treated unequally. We're not telling you can. You just have to be at a private school of this size in order for that to happen.
So I just want to pull up the NRS that's referenced because, and I think in Paul's point where we said if we change this, do we have the right to change it? The NRS actually states in A that the charter, private, parochial, public, has to have less than, fewer than 30. So
Oh.
it's already in NRS that we made a regulation that basically contradicts this NRS, which it was approved, so I guess it was okay, but I didn't understand how, because these two to me conflict. Our regulation and this NRS conflict.
Well, and
But
I'm
if we
sure
got
that, I'm sure when the NIAA made the regulation, it's because the charters were so small.
yeah,
But not anymore.
That and many of them didn't offer sports.
Right.
right.
So
Well,
I'm sure
and-
the intent behind this when it was created was a good intentions, and then no one's ever looked at it again.
Right.
Yeah,
I think
385B 726 existed prior to this
Four.
statute being put into.
Okay, that makes sense.
into
Yeah, this
play.
was 2017. You're right. Yeah. So technically our regulation, we've been out of compliance with the statute since the statute came about in 2017. We should not have been allowing these charter school students to play unless their school is under 30.
Yeah. So
There's
it
actually-
has to
Yeah, and
There's
so
no choice.
385B.065 would be the basis to change NAC 385B 726.
Yeah, that we need to remove it because it no longer follows the state
How many kids
statute.
is that going to affect? Like I don't know
A lot.
when is
I could give you a number. I could give you an estimate if I looked at I have like a tracker. It's a lot, and that's just ones I approved this year. So you got to multiply that by 4 because after the first year they're approved, they don't need to be approved again. But I would say it's a big, big number.
And you would get pushback from charter because, like I said, they bank on the fact that they can market that we're going to build up these certain sports, but you can go play somewhere else. If they have to start offering other sports, they're going to get frustrated, or if they're going to lose their kids because now they have to make a choice, just like we all have to make choices for our kids.
I think
it'll be tough.
I think you're making a lot of generalizations about charter schools. What you're saying is not totally true. So
It's not true for every charter school.
I know, but that's what you're making it out to be. Some charter schools don't offer sports because of facilities and because of different things. The more space, the more buildings, the more things you have. Obviously, you want a school that can have Friday night football games and all the things that come with it. Unfortunately, we don't have the land donated and we don't have the ability to build a football field. So I'm just going to speak for Doral. My high school, we offer every sport but football and wrestling. Those are the only 2 sports that we currently don't offer. And we probably won't ever offer football and wrestling. I've got a kid that goes to Bonanza and wrestles. He was good enough to make the team. He's here. So it's not a fact that I would never tell a kid, oh yeah, just come here for this and go there for that. Like, we just don't offer wrestling. So that's where the kid is for that. And it's a space thing. That's all it is. Again, we would love to have Stansfield on Friday and have football and all the things. Somerset Losey's doing it. They have a field. They're a charter school. They've got a field. Matter. They have a field. It's a space thing, which is why a lot of us don't offer all of the sports. As we grow and some places are buying land and doing things, they can offer sports. We don't have a baseball field. We have baseball. We don't have a softball field. We have softball. We don't have tennis. We have tennis. So we're going out finding places so we can offer these sports to our kids so that they can compete. Because if I had my choice, my kids would be here doing the sports that they do. I don't like my kid being an all-state wrestler at Bonanza, but we don't offer wrestling, so that's where he has to go. But just to say that, we're marketing kids to, just come here for this and go there for that. That's not how we do things. And so you're going to do it.
And we're not saying that that's how every charter school does that.
So it's just.
But there's a lot of charter schools that could go out and find baseball and softball and tennis, and they don't. There's a lot of schools that could go out and find off campus, and they don't, is what I'm saying. You guys, unfortunately, probably are the exception.
Well, it's just, and again, now you're talking about, I don't know how quickly this would go into effect, but you're talking about kids again who I guess they're going to just make a choice in their junior year of whether they're going to return or go wrestle for their junior or senior year with kids they don't know. So that's it. I just had to have my 2 cents.
No, I think you bring up a really good point on it, because the difference between private and charter, right? A private school is tuition based. So, if they want to build more facilities, they have more leeway to do things like that, possibly if they're bigger. Now we're getting in the argument of our smaller ones might not have the funds to really do that, but in essence, they have the tuition potentially to build the facilities to have more sports. Whereas, like you were saying, Reggie, that's a great point for charter schools, is you don't necessarily have the funds to just go out. A lot of your public based. So that's the difference. And I think why this regulation was originally, created. Number one, they didn't offer sports, and two, if they did offer sports, it was just, one or two here or there. But I do still see the argument from the other side that we are, getting to a point where we have a lot of charter school students, and they're they get the best of both worlds. The school gets the best of both worlds. Taking it away could be a big deterrent for charter school participation, and that could hurt your numbers, and that could be hard too. So I see it from both sides, and that's why I really wanted to bring it here, so that we could see both sides and really talk about where do we go from here. We have an NRS we're in violation of. Do we need to get rid of this, or do we need to pivot on what we're doing and enforce that, regulation a little bit stricter?
It sounds to me, and again, remind me, the NRS was created first, is that right?
No, our regulation was created first in 2004.
And then the NRS was put in with a limitation on
Correct.
participation from charter schools and private schools in their zone schools. So at some point, somebody gathered together and said, hey, we can't just let them all do it. There's got to be some sort of limitation on which charter schools get to do it, because there's got to be some reason as to why they're allowing them to do it. It's not just that the sport isn't offered. That can't be the reason. There's got to be a reason why we let these kids not play for the school in which they go to. So, to me, I think the thing that makes most sense is for us to rethink that stipulation, rethink that limitation, instead of it just being the arbitrary 30 kids, which seems to be a thing that's like, again, I don't know the number of schools in the state that have less than 30 kids, but that seems to be a limitation that is more of a deterrent in nature than it is actually like a dividing line of like why the school should be allowed to do it versus why this school shouldn't be.
Yeah, 30. We only have one. We have one public school that's under 30 GABs in our whole state. They currently don't even have sports this year at all because they're so small.
Is that in
member school-
Northern? Where's that school located?
Central, somewhere central, I believe.
Okay.
It's northern Nye County. It's, just outside of Fallon, Gabs.
Yeah. So member school wise, we don't have a lot of, but what happens is we might have students that are attending outside of our membership at these very small private schools that could be trying to play at their zone school. But member schools, we don't have any besides the one under 30. Any other thoughts on this?
Well, I'd like to hear from Reggie a little bit more just in regards to how that, like, what's a typical situation for a charter school kid who like I'm just, is it that the kid is like, I want to wrestle, or did they come there and they're like, I'm a wrestler, but I want to come here because of the education and things like that?
So the kid that I was referred to at Bonanza, he's been here for like 3 years. This is his first year. He wanted to wrestle. This was his first year wanting to wrestle. He tried out, he made the team, and so he's wrestling at Bonanza. So again, because we don't offer it. Also, when you look at our true numbers, right? Like we have the multiplier, we're doubled, all those wonderful things. So when you look at numbers also of charter schools, we don't really have the numbers that it looks like we have to offer all the sports that are out there, right? I got 1,000 high schoolers, but I'd have to play 4A football. I don't have enough football players to be able to do that. So even with the multiplier, it makes things more difficult on us because our numbers aren't truly our numbers. So again, those are things that are also in place that are hindering us from growing, because if we threw a football team out there, we're not going to have 70 guys playing for a football in a 1,000-person charter school. So that also affects us as far as offering the sports that we can offer.
That's a good point, Reggie.
Hey, Kate and Tim, have you surveyed, I don't know, Section 7 schools, or are you aware of any states that are in the same situation as we are and we allow this? Because I know there's some states, because the number of charter schools and private schools they have their separate leagues. They have private leagues and they have charter leagues.
I'll let Tim, I mean, I haven't surveyed anybody, so I don't know those numbers, but I don't know if he did. Is he still on? He's got his camera off, so I don't think he's there, but I don't know that number. It's definitely something we could do, though. I would be interested to see that, because obviously across the country, the number of charter schools has gone up drastically in the last 10 years, even more in the last 5 years, I'd say. So I think that's a good idea to just kind of see what other states are doing with this. I'm leery to change it one way or not. I'm leery to keep it, and I'm leery to change it, because there's reasons to keep it, there's reasons to not keep it, and I see both sides very clearly. I even see the fact that, it was brought up about, if we don't allow this, now we have schools, say there's a charter really close to a school that's really struggling to field some of their teams, and the fact that we allow those students at the charter school nearby to play at their own school, and they're their own school, they're benefiting from that and able to field maybe some teams they wouldn't otherwise be able to field. So we're taking away opportunities of kids and possibly of rosters at their own schools too, if we take this away. So that to me, wasn't even something I had first initially considered with removing this, how it would affect the public school that's close by. But is it also unfair that those public schools that are near, really close to charter schools, get the benefit of that, when other public schools that are not near a charter, don't have a lot of school students that are zoned there going to charters? Is that an unfair advantage to those?
I believe there's building regulations too for charter schools. They can't be within a certain distance of public schools. Paul, do you know? I think that's correct.
I'm not
and then
that. Reggie might know.
I don't know about that. I don't know about that side, because within our system at Doral, we had a school built, and then CCSD built a school like really around the corner, like right down the street. So I don't know if there's a distance regulation involved. And I know we're talking about fairness and different ways, but schools benefit and not benefit. And the new rule coming in with the transfer rule doesn't benefit charter schools whatsoever. I mean, that's a great rule. Like I 1,000% believe that it should be in, but it doesn't benefit any of the charter schools, because we all have lottery systems and waiting lists. And so even if I got a kid lives, across the street that's 6'3", 220, throws a 95-mile-an-hour fastball, it doesn't mean he's going to ever get to come to my school, because we're a lottery-based system. So every rule, you guys, that we put into place is not going to be 100% effective for every student. So again, if I see both sides of this too. That's why I was quiet for so long, because I do understand, you as an administrator, you go watch your basketball team play, and 3 of the 5 kids on the court aren't even your kids. Like, I don't even know these kids. They don't walk my hallways. That kind of messes with the chemistry of your building and all of that. But at the same time, I'm about kids and sports and being able to play and having that opportunity. And so I see both sides of it. I just don't want it unfairly stated that, we're marketing, do half of this and half of that and try to take advantage of a situation. Again, we're limited on the land that we get, we're limited on the growth that we have. And we're doing every sport that's offered except right now football and wrestling. And if I got a football player and a wrestler that wants to play at their own school, I would hope that they're able to do that. But if it changes, then the parents will have to make a decision. I 100% get that. But
So I think for the sake of time, just so we can get to our last item here, I'll talk with Tim and maybe we'll look out across, the country or at least our Section 7 schools and just see how they're handling, the increase in charter schools, and we'll bring that back and we can continue this conversation, maybe talk to some other folks about it, that are in your circles and get some more feedback on, how our member schools are feeling about this and kind of give the pros and cons that we've talked about here, because I think it'd be important to hear others' thoughts as well. And we'll bring it back and maybe have a continued conversation. Say it again.
Data collected in our own state would be helpful as well. How many kids are attending charter schools and playing sports for other schools? I mean, how big of a problem is this, or
And I know
not a problem?
Clark County has those numbers. They require a fee, so I know they have those numbers readily available. I can always obviously use my transfer numbers, but that's only accurate for who, applied for it for the first time this year. I can kind of estimate a little bit from that number though, and kind of give at least a rough number. So yeah, I can definitely get some numbers of students affected, and bring those back as well. All right, so anything else before we move on to our final topic here? Okay, good conversation on that. Okay, so that was public comment. So number 8, this is just a quick update for you all. We talked last time about incoming freshman residency changes and how those are handled. I referenced how Clark County School District, requires their administrators to provide additional documentation, even though it's not required in Activate for anybody that's moved between 8th and 9th grade. So what I've done since our last meeting is met with Activate. We did talk about some updates in the system. I don't know when they'll take effect. It does take time to make some of these pathway changes. It's pretty intricate, but we are going to add a question about, have you moved in the past 12 months to those incoming freshmen? And if they have, then we are going to require a document of abandonment just so we can verify their new address and really establish that new address is where they are currently for high school. And we are going to add the transcript for all incoming freshmen so that we can get a full middle school transcript to verify that they indeed did not participate out of state or in a private or charter or somewhere that, is outside of maybe our membership that we can't tell. They're not a feeder school into the program. We don't know where they went, but they ensured that they are, a true 9th grader, didn't do 9th grade somewhere else. So we made those updates. I don't know when they'll take effect, like I said, but I'll keep you updated on that. Just small changes to Activate to help us combat some of those issues that we're seeing between 8th and 9th grade. Any questions on that? Comments?
Thank you.
You're welcome. All right, cool. We're going to move on to future planning. So I know we have several regulations we've talked about today that we'll bring back, so I will do that. But is there anything outside of the topics we discussed today that we'll be bringing back that you would like to talk about at the next meeting?
It's not for the next meeting, but I have a question for Paul. Have we heard anything back on the one-time transfer?
No, like I say, I mentioned at the board meeting that legislature's in full swing now, and so we're not going to hear anything back on that, I don't think, until summer. I mean, I really don't think that's going to happen, but
Okay.
You never know. So it's still that one's sitting there. The sportsmanship one that we made a few tweaks to is still sitting there, which is really too bad. That's the one where we could have implemented that, that addressed dealing with parents and fans and that sort of thing. But both those are sitting there, and will be, just because the staff is all tied up with all the statutes and that sort of thing, and bills that are being addressed at the legislature now.
Okay.
I think, the greater, not concern, but I think the greater question is not whether, I think in due time it'll get passed. It is what it is. I think
It's the timeline, yeah.
timeline. It's like when, because if it passes that certain date, then is it for sure that we're not going to be able to get it effective by fall? That's the question, at least, I mean, and from a private school standpoint, families have for me, like all the time.
Same here. I
Question.
keep getting the question.
What's the question? So,
Like, how likely is it that it's going to get passed in time that we can make it effective for the fall?
okay, well,
Like, 'cause
I think it's doubtful that our regulation will be, but I didn't add this, Tammy. There is a bill that was introduced, AB 184, I believe it is, that basically takes our one-time transfer rule and puts it into some regulatory form with a few other things. And we're going to be meeting with that, the assembly person that's sponsoring that, just to let them know, and discuss that, we have the one-time transfer rule that we feel is effective, and see if they'll, withdraw that bill, because we don't agree with it entirely, as it's been introduced, and we would rather, as we've talked at the Board of Control, have the NIAA control how the one-time transfer rule works, because I think we're more the expert than some of these others that are trying to legislate it. So that's a better answer for you. I forgot to mention that earlier. And Cy, I just don't know. I doubt that there's going to be anything where they can decide prior to next school year.
That's good to know though, because we do keep getting those. I'm sure everyone is getting those questions.
Yeah, because our admissions process is like deadline to like this weekend. And so I think a lot of families are like, well, do I transfer in? I'm like, well, I can't help you. But
Yeah. Okay, anything for future planning? Anything to put on the next agenda outside of what we're bringing back?
Kate, I don't know when you're going to have the meeting, but I do know one other thing that's come up, and it's a big deal, I think, is President Trump's mandate, and as well as the Congress has a bill dealing with transgender policies and participation rules, that are. So the question, and I've talked about this with Tim briefly, I think it's going to be on our next Board of Control agenda, is do we, in light of the executive order that was entered, are we in violation of that executive order by having a transfer or a transgender policy right now? And do we just repeal that, or what do we do? And the answer from my end is I don't know. I haven't had a chance to look at that and closely enough, but I think that's something this committee might need to consider.
Has the governor and the state done anything yet?
There's a bill.
There is a bill pending that mirrors what Trump did. So whether that gets legs we have a fairly liberal assembly and Senate, the majorities with the Democrats down there. And so I question whether that'll ever get off the ground down in Carson City. But I think the federal law ends up preempting all of it anyway.
Anything else?
I'm also going to be attending a open workshop for executive directors on Wednesday to discuss this with the NFHS, as they came out with a no statement as of right now, but they're having an open forum where they're going to have their legal team on, and I can report back on that as well.
All right, if there's nothing else, I'll move on to public comment. This time provides an opportunity for citizens to address the committee about any matter not on the agenda. Items raised during this portion of the agenda cannot be deliberated or acted upon. Should a member of the public wish to speak on a matter not listed on the agenda, it is asked that said person please complete a green public comment card and submit it to the committee chair prior to the opening of this item. A limit of 3 minutes per person and/or 5 minutes for the spokesperson of a particular group may be imposed. It's requested that comments be directed to the committee as a whole. Comments that are determined to be irrelevant, repetitious, offensive, inflammatory, willfully disruptive, or deemed to be personal attacks will not be permitted. If you look in our packet, page 22, there is public comment that was emailed in. So I just will read this on the record. This is from Joselito Diaz, who is the athletic director at Coral Academy Las Vegas. And he just states, we've faced teams in JV basketball with starting varsity players, 3 to 4 teams. I understand the rules. They have 7 to 8 players on their teams. Can you please bring this up at the rules committee? And so we won't discuss that, but I'll just leave that there for you to see. And we'll move to adjourn.